Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Gabbi Doolin. Gabbi Doolin was born on December 26, 2007, in Scottsville, Kentucky, a small town with a population of just over 4,000. In Scottsville, most people know each other or know someone in every family. Like many small towns, here there are very few types of entertainment. Locals primarily focused on school sports, especially football. The local school had good fields for football, baseball, and tennis, where they frequently held games and competitions. Participating in these activities has become a tradition for locals, especially when their children participate. Gabbi's family was typical. Her parents had 3 children, 2 sons and 1 daughter. The oldest son was a member of the school football team, while Gabbi participated in cheerleading. In November 2015, when Gabbi was 7 years old, their town was preparing for the biggest football game of the year. Their school team was about to compete against a team from another county. And everyone was excited for this contest. Although Gabbi's older brother played on the team, but she liked playing with other children more than playing games. Gabbi's parents originally intended to leave her at home with their youngest son, cared for by a relative. However, Gabbi convinced them to let her join them. On the evening of November 14th, they went to the school field for a game. In addition to local people, many people from a neighboring county came to support their team. Once they arrived at the stadium, Gabbi saw her friends and asked her mom if she could play with them. Her mom agreed but reminded her to stay on school grounds and stick with the other kids. After that, her mom went to the bleachers, while she ran off to meet her friends. Gabbi ran back and forth to her mom a few times. After that, she ran away to play again. At one point, she visited her dad, who was in the announcement room, and asked him for some money to buy snacks at the concession stand, then she running off again. Minutes later, Gabbi's friends approached her mom in the bleachers, looking worried. Her mom noticed Gabbi was not with them and asked what was wrong. The girls explained they had decided to play hide and seek, and Gabbi was to find them. They had hidden in the restroom, but time passed, and Gabbi never found them. Thinking they had won, the girls left their hiding spot to find Gabbi, but she was nowhere to be seen. They called her name and checked all the places they had been playing earlier, but Gabbi had seemingly disappeared. They then remembered that Gabbi might have gone to the bleachers to find her mom, so they rushed there. Gabbi's mother panicked when she discovered her daughter was missing and quickly informed her husband. He hurried off to search the area around the stadium. Meanwhile, the mother headed to the concession stand, where Gabbi had wanted to buy snacks, to continue her search. While searching, the parents Gabbi's encountered friends and shared the news about their daughter's disappearance. Concerned, their friends joined in the search for Gabbi. They thoroughly searched the area around the stadium but found no trace of Gabbi. Returning to the stadium, the parents Gabbi's made an announcement over the loudspeakers in hopes that she would hear it, but there was still no sign of her. As the game paused and spectators returned to their seats, they continued to ask people if they had seen Gabbi, and some offered to help search as well. They went out again to search the area around the stadium and asked the staff to turn on flashlights around the baseball field, which led to a small forest. They walked through the forest but still couldn't find Gabbi. By this time, about 20 minutes had passed since she disappeared, and the parents decided to call the police. Officers quickly arrived at the scene, listened to the accounts from the parents and Gabbi's friends, and they began their search. The local police department had little experience with serious cases like this, as child disappearances were rare in their small town. The officers immediately considered the worst-case scenario, that Gabbi may have been abducted or harmed. The officers encountered a pressing issue. The suspected kidnapper was likely at the stadium, where a game was about to conclude. Realizing they had limited time before fans started leaving, which may include suspects, they decided to stop the game and lock down the stadium, keeping everyone inside. Police kept watch at all exits to stop anyone from fleeing. They decided not to inform people about the situation, to avoid causing panic, so as not to hinder their search. If people became aware that a kidnapper of a 7-year-old girl might be nearby, it could lead to chaos. Meanwhile, state police arrived at the school and began searching the surrounding area. They moved toward the baseball field and entered the woods. Deeper into the trees, they discovered a small creek where they found the body of a girl, later identified as Gabbi. They called for an ambulance to transport her body to the medical examiner. A preliminary examination indicated asphyxiation due to visible marks on her neck. Furthermore, part of Gabbi's clothes were also missing, making the police suspect that she had been sexually assaulted. Gabbi's mother saw an ambulance near the woods and immediately thought that her daughter had been found in need of medical attention. She rushed to the scene, but was stopped by the police, who didn't want her to witness the disturbing scene they were dealing with. The police investigation had quickly turned into a murder case, so they decided to relocate everyone from the stadium to the school gym. The investigators suspected that the killer might be among the group, and they needed to identify the perpetrator as soon as possible. The investigators then informed Gabbi's parents about the likely circumstances of her death. They inquired if the parents had any suspicions about the person responsible for this heinous act. Specifically, they inquired if anyone had made threats against the family or if the parents had noticed anything unusual. However, Gabbi's parents stated they had no idea who could be behind this act. Then, detectives interviewing Gabbi's friends to see if they had noticed anything unusual that evening. They asked if anyone had been following or watching them, but the girls didn't remember anything suspicious. Detectives also brought Gabbi's friends to the gym and asked them to carefully observe the people present, hoping to trigger their memory. Unfortunately, this effort did not yield any significant leads. The lead detective persisted in his belief that Gabbi's friends may have unknowingly seen the kidnapper. He suspected that they might have been hesitant to point him out due to fear. To aid their recall, he encouraged them to remember every detail from that evening. Eventually, one of Gabbi's friends mentioned that when she hid from Gabbi in the restroom, she saw a man near the door. Although the girl's memory of the man's appearance was limited, she recalled that he was wearing a denim jacket. The police spoke to the ticket vendor, who confirmed seeing a man with a denim jacket draped. The vendor found this person's behavior unusual and suspected he was intoxicated. Although this new information helped, the police still couldn't identify the man. The police started questioning the people who had been at the game. As they did, it became clear why they were all being held there. They grew concerned, particularly for the safety of their children. Despite their fear, they cooperated with the police and answered their questions. To further investigate, the police cross-referenced the names of men present in the gym against a sex offenders registry, but found no matches. They also checked on sex offenders who had lived near the school, verifying their whereabouts at the time of the incident, but all of them had alibis. None of them had been near the school at the time of the incident. Several witnesses reported that they saw a man named Timothy Madden, he acting strangely near the women's restroom during the game. As a local resident, many people were familiar with him, but they stated that his behavior that evening seemed suspicious. According to these witnesses, Madden was wearing a denim jacket, which matches the description provided by one of Gabbi's friends who also saw a man near the restroom. A witness who was a distant relative of Timothy reported that during the game, Timothy seemed distracted. Despite his younger son playing on the field, Timothy, who normally showed great interest in his son's sports activities, wasn't paying attention. Several other witnesses also expressed concerns about Timothy's unusual behavior, leading investigators to interrogate him. As night fell, many people had been released from the school. Before speaking with Timothy, investigators sought the local sheriff's opinion. The sheriff, who had known Timothy, doubted he was capable of committing such a crime. Timothy lived with his wife and 5 children. When police went to speak with him, they knocked on his door, and he answered. The officers asked if he knew the reason for their visit, and Timothy stated he was aware of Gabbi's murder, but had no involvement in it. The detectives then used a tactic to gather more information. They asked Timothy if he could explain why several eyewitnesses claimed to have recorded him talking to Gabbi shortly before her murder, through videos they supposedly provided. However, the detectives had fabricated this information. Their intention was to provoke Timothy into revealing his guilt or new information if he was involved in the crime. Timothy initially claimed he had no knowledge of the events, but he quickly changed his story. He admitted to speaking to Gabbi near the stadium that evening. According to Timothy, he had stepped outside to smoke when several girls ran by him. Shortly after, Gabbi approached and asked if he had seen her friends, explaining they were playing hide-and-seek and she couldn't find them. Timothy directed her towards their location, and she ran off. The detectives found Timothy's rapid change in story suspicious. Furthermore, his account indicated that he had spoken to Gabbi just minutes before her disappearance. Notably, at the time when they met near the stadium, there were no witnesses present, which could have provided Timothy with an opportunity to commit the crime. The detectives then inquired if Timothy could provide a reasonable explanation if his DNA was found on Gabbi's body. He replied calmly that he had none. They also requested a DNA sample from Timothy and the clothing he wore at the stadium. Timothy agreed to both requests. However, when handing over his clothing to the police, they discovered suspicious stains on the pants, denim jacket, and underwear that resembled blood. When questioned about the stains, Timothy insisted they were just dirt and denied any wrongdoing. However, the police were skeptical and decided to wait for the DNA analysis results to proceed with an arrest. After several days, the forensic pathologist completed the examination of the victim's body, confirming that Gabbi's cause of death was manual strangulation. The pathologist also determined that she had been brutally assaulted. A biological sample of the perpetrator was extracted and sent to the laboratory for further analysis. The day after the murder, something unexpected happened. An anonymous letter arrived at the police station, claiming a suspicious person had been seen at the game. The letter provided a detailed description of the person's car, including the make and license plate number. This allowed investigators to quickly track down the vehicle's owner, who was a student living about 30 minutes from Scottsville. When questioned by the police, the student denied attending the game and knowing about the murder. He claimed to have been at work that evening, and the police were able to verify his alibi. As a result, he was removed from the list of suspects. Despite this, the person who wrote the anonymous letter was never identified. It is unclear whether the letter was intended as a trap or a cruel joke, but it is clear that the student was innocent. Police quickly received additional clues. Several people reported suspicious behavior by a 16-year-old local boy. He had given conflicting accounts of his whereabouts on the day of the game, claiming both to have been there and not to have attended. He also mentioned seeing girls playing hide and seek. The detectives discovered that the boy was Timothy Madden's son. However, what they found even more alarming was that the boy had threatened his father with a knife just 2 weeks before the murder. The police wanted to question the boy further but needed his parents to be present. However, his mother refused to cooperate and wouldn't provide a DNA sample, leaving the police without any concrete evidence. As news of the police investigation into the Timothy family spread, rumors began circulating in the small town of Scottsville. Some speculated that one of Timothy's older sons could be a suspect, while others suspected Timothy himself. Gabbi's parents were shocked to hear these rumors, especially since they had known Timothy Madden since childhood and were close to his family. Their children played on the same sports teams, and they would often sit together at games. Given their long-standing friendship, Gabbi's parents found it difficult to imagine that anyone from their social circle could be connected to the murder. Following the spread of rumors in town, another incident occurred. The 20-year-old eldest son of the Timothy family began sending text messages to the police. He using profanity and issuing threats, insisting police stop bothering his family. He then was promptly arrested for making these threats. Further investigation revealed that there was an outstanding arrest warrant for him in another town, related to allegations of assaulting a minor. During questioning, the young man attributed his behavior to frustration over the accusations against his family. He denied any involvement in the murder, claiming he was at his cousin's house in a neighboring town on the evening in question. He consented to providing a DNA sample, which was then sent to the lab for analysis. On November 20th, 6 days after Gabbi's murder, her funeral was held, drawing hundreds of mourners from Scottsville and surrounding towns. Everyone came together to support Gabbi's parents, donating to help cover the funeral expenses. Meanwhile, the lab finished analyzing the DNA evidence, comparing it to samples from Timothy and his son. The results were conclusive. The semen on Gabbi's body matched Timothy Madden's DNA, and the blood on his clothes matched Gabbi's DNA. Detectives attended the funeral and discreetly informed Gabbi's parents about this. At the same time, police officers arrived at Timothy's house and took him into custody. However, Timothy still maintains that he is innocent. He said the blood on his clothes was his own, the result of a scratch from a fence. This contradicted his initial testimony to police, in which he had claimed the stain was mud. With the DNA evidence in hand, the prosecution took the case to court, seeking the death penalty. During trial preparation, Timothy's lawyer maintained his client's innocence. He raised concerns about the reliability of the evidence, citing inconsistencies in the timeline. Specifically, the lawyer argued that Timothy was at the stadium filming a game at the time of the murder. However, Timothy himself had previously told police that he saw Gabbi around the same time. The lawyer highlighted that Gabbi's body was discovered in a creek, yet when Timothy returned to the stadium, his clothes were dry. Additionally, Timothy's mother, who resided with him, reported that when Timothy came home, he was wearing clean clothes, didn't look troubled, and behaved as usual. However, the prosecution argued that the discovery of Timothy's semen on Gabbi's body made all of the defense's arguments meaningless. This evidence firmly established that Timothy was involved in the case. According to police, his account of that evening contained some truth. It is possible that Timothy did leave the stadium during the game and encountered Gabbi, who was searching for her friends. Given that Timothy was the father of one of Gabbi's friends, she would have been familiar with him. Gabbi may have approached Timothy to ask about the whereabouts of the other girls. At this point, Timothy might have concocted a plan, telling Gabbi that the girls had gone into the woods behind the baseball field and offered to take her there. Once they were far enough from the school, he could have assaulted and killed her, then go back to the match. The wait for Timothy's trial had been ongoing for 4 years, causing distress for Gabbi's family. They were anxious for justice to be served and for the person responsible for the murder to be held accountable. However, the case was slowed down due to many administrative procedures, leaving the family frustrated and having to wait for many years. In 2019, the prosecution and defense started negotiating a plea deal. The prosecution proposed waiving the death penalty if Timothy pleaded guilty and accepted a life sentence. Gabbi's parents supported this proposal, as the prolonged wait for the trial was taking a toll on them. They also wanted to avoid the emotional pain of attending multiple hearings. Although Timothy had consistently maintained his innocence, he eventually agreed to the plea deal and confessed. However, the terms of the agreement did not require him to disclose the details of his actions. He only had to admit his guilt. This was unsatisfactory for Gabbi's family, as they wanted the perpetrator to take full responsibility for his crimes and provide a complete account of what happened to their daughter. The court hearing became heated, Gabbi's father yelling at Timothy and Timothy's relatives shouting at Gabbi's family. The judge was forced to intervene, calling a break and separating the parties. Ultimately, Timothy was sentenced to life in a maximum security prison.
Molly Nicole Watson was born on December 15, 1982, in Moberly, Missouri. Her parents, Timothy and Sandy, and her brother Tim, have always created a warm and supportive home. Diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome, Molly embraced her differences and forged ahead with resilience and determination. Those who have come into contact with her often describe her as energetic, creative, and extremely passionate. Molly earned a master's degree in psychology and dedicated her career to education. She lived in a colorful and creative world filled with Harry Potter books, comic novels, Disney characters, and intricate cosplay costumes. Her creativity even extended to designing her own nail polish line. Her home was her sanctuary, packed with books, fantasy, and the comforting presence of her 5 cats. She was a unique mix of strength and gentleness, calm yet unapologetically herself. In her mid-20s, Molly married, but the relationship ended in divorce after 2 years. Not long after, she discovered she was pregnant before her son was born. Molly began a new and unexpected chapter, a relationship with Amber Brady, a childhood acquaintance. Though not close when they were younger, reconnecting years later brought them together. Both women were fresh from failed marriages, and what began as a surprise blossomed into a meaningful and fulfilling partnership. When Molly gave birth to her son, Declan, who was diagnosed with cerebral palsy, Amber was by her side. Together, they supported each other through life's challenges. After her maternity leave, Molly began working at the Moberly Area Correctional Center, where she met James Addy, a married Navy veteran and corrections officer 16 years her senior. Despite their differences, Molly and James grew close. James confided in Molly, claiming that his marriage to his wife Melanie was ending. Believing him, Molly allowed their friendship to develop into a secret affair. They discreetly met in motels, hiding their relationship, Molly from Amber and James from his wife. The truth unraveled when Amber spotted Molly with James at a gas station. Growing suspicious, Amber eventually followed Molly to a motel and confronted her. That confrontation marked the end of Molly and Amber's relationship. Now free from the constraints of her past, Molly is openly dating James and is madly in love with him. However, her friends noticed something unusual. Molly paid all the bills, while James was cold, distant, and unwilling to commit fully. Despite this, Molly believed he was the one. In October 2017, James told Molly that his divorce had been finalized, filled with happiness and hope. Molly took the initiative and proposed. After James agreed, she threw herself into planning the wedding with joy and excitement. She envisioned a Disney-inspired celebration based on Beauty and the Beast, with burgundy and gold as her chosen colors. Molly hired a wedding planner, makeup artist, hairstylist, and even purchased 2 wedding dresses because she couldn't decide between them. She documented her journey on a new YouTube channel, radiating happiness as she shared her plans. Her eyes sparkled in her videos as she spoke with enthusiasm and sang softly in her princess-like voice. To Molly, the wedding felt like a real-life fairy tale. As the big day approached, however, life took a darker turn. At the end of 2017, James's ex-wife Melanie was involved in a severe car accident that left her on life support. James had to step in to care for their children, and Molly stood by him during this difficult time. They considered postponing their wedding, but ultimately decided to proceed with their plans. In April 2018, just days before their wedding, Melanie unexpectedly passed away. Despite the heartbreak, Molly pressed on, handling the final wedding arrangements alone, while James focused on planning Melanie's funeral. The situation was deeply tragic, but Molly remained determined to prepare for what she thought would be the happiest day of her life. Amid the grief, a surprising detail came to light. Melanie wasn't James's first or even second wife. She was his fourth. Before meeting Molly, James had been married multiple times. When they went to the courthouse to apply for their marriage license, the process turned uncomfortable. James appeared anxious, avoided direct answers about his marital history, and seemed reluctant to share details. Molly either didn't notice or chose to ignore these red flags. Her love for James outweighed any doubts or concerns. However, Molly never made it to the altar. On the night of April 27, 2018, just 2 days before the wedding, her body was found on a remote gravel road in Monroe County. What initially seemed like an accident quickly developed into a homicide investigation. At the scene, investigators found no evidence of a struggle, and none of Molly's belongings were missing. Her jewelry remained untouched. Inside her car, police discovered wedding-related documents, including plans and checklists, everything bearing the name James. These clues led them directly to James's home. Around 2:30 a.m., officers knocked on James's door. However, instead of meeting a grieving fiancé, they encountered a woman, his wife, Melanie. This was shocking because Melanie was supposed to have died just days earlier in a hospital after a severe car accident. As it turned out, James had fabricated the entire story about Melanie's death. She was alive and still married to him, yet he had simultaneously planned to marry Molly. Both James and Melanie were taken in for questioning. Initially, detectives did not realize that Melanie was the woman James claimed was dead, only that they were dealing with James, who was allegedly involved in a murder while still married. Melanie, on the other hand, was blindsided. Melanie knew who Molly was, but thought she was just one of James's co-workers. When questioning turned to Molly's death, Melanie assumed the police were merely speaking to people who knew her. The truth came as a devastating shock. Melanie had no idea that her husband had been unfaithful, let alone engaged to another woman. James's double life had been so carefully hidden that Melanie, who lived in the same house as him, never suspected a thing. She told investigators that James came home every night like clockwork and showed no signs of dissatisfaction or a secret life. In hindsight, she began recalling suspicious details, such as how he often arrived home 2 hours late, which he brushed off as extra work or traffic. She had never pushed for explanations, and only now did the pieces begin to fall into place. Police uncovered that James had been living a double life for years. To Molly, James had claimed he was in the process of getting divorced, but in truth, he had never even filed for divorce. When questioned about his marital status, he invented a dramatic story about how his wife, Melanie, had been in a terrible car accident, was in a coma, and later died. Molly believed him. She trusted the man she loved and had no reason to doubt his word. Using this fictional story to hide his shady past, James accepts Molly's proposal and plans a wedding with her that he knows will never happen. When James's deception finally came to light, investigators began treating him as a suspect. Melanie provided a timeline for the night Molly was murdered. James had told her he was meeting a friend at 7:30 p.m., but he returned home closer to an hour later, claiming his friend had cancelled. However, Melanie and their teenage daughter contradicted his story. They recalled James arriving home closer to 10 p.m., far later than he had claimed. The timeline wasn't the only issue. Their daughter remembered that James went straight to the shower when he got home and then immediately started a load of laundry. For detectives, this behavior was telling. It suggested that James might have been trying to clean evidence like blood, dirt, or gun residue from his clothes. His alibi quickly unraveled. Police arrested James and scheduled formal questioning for the next day. Melanie, devastated by James's infidelity and deceit, returned home after giving her statement. Despite her heartbreak, she had to maintain a facade of normalcy for her daughter, who was excitedly preparing for a school dance. But behind closed doors, Melanie began searching for answers. Her investigation led her to the attic, where she uncovered shocking secrets hidden in a trunk: photos, letters, souvenirs, and evidence of a double life her husband had lived for 7 years. James had taken trips with another woman, Molly, claiming they were work-related, or outings with friends. The betrayal was overwhelming. Melanie stayed composed for her daughter, but privately, she was unraveling a terrifying truth. This was not just a case of infidelity, but something far darker: murder. For nearly a decade, James had juggled 2 relationships, maintaining 2 homes and nearly entering into 2 marriages. But it all came to light when Molly, his mistress, was found dead. James's teenage daughter, Emma, didn't learn about her father's secret life from him or her mother. Instead, she discovered the shocking truth through an online news article her classmates had seen. Her world, once private, was now laid bare for everyone to see. For a teenager, the humiliation was unbearable. Whispers, stares, and judgment followed her through school hallways. As the story made national headlines, Emma uncovered even more heartbreaking details about her father's betrayal, and Molly, the woman he had planned to marry. While reading news reports, Emma remembered she had met Molly before. Years earlier, her father had brought her to Molly's home to help sew a cosplay costume. At the time, Emma believed Molly was just a friend. Now, the memory seemed painfully clear as Emma and her mother, Melanie, struggled to come to terms with the betrayal. Law enforcement continued connecting the dots, building a case against James. At the scene of Molly's murder, investigators found tire tracks matching James's car. His vehicle had mud on it, consistent with the rural road where Molly had been killed. More damning evidence surfaced when they recovered a white t-shirt nearby, customized by Emma as a gift for her father. The t-shirt contained traces of gunpowder and Molly's DNA, making James the prime suspect. While the bullet that killed Molly was too damaged to be traced to a specific gun, the circumstantial evidence against James was strong. Phone records revealed that James had called Molly the night she died, speaking with her for 20 minutes near the site where her body was discovered. Additionally, Glenn McParron, the man who found Molly's body, testified that he had briefly encountered a white man, around 50 years old, near the scene that night. Prosecutors argued this man was James. Prosecutors argued that James's motive was fear. Molly had grown suspicious and had begun searching online for information about James's wife, Melanie. She found no obituaries or hospital records because Melanie was still alive. Once Molly discovered the truth, prosecutors believed James saw her as a threat to his secrets. Instead of ending the affair or confessing, he allegedly decided to silence Molly permanently. What made his crime so alarming wasn't just its brutality, but also its carelessness. James left a shirt designed by Emma at the crime scene and his name on documents in Molly's car. He behaved as if his actions couldn't be traced, but the evidence trail he left behind was glaring. The trial began on April 26, 2021, with prosecutors presenting tire tread analyses, forensic evidence, and witness testimonies to reveal the full scope of James's actions. Melanie testified, stating that she had no knowledge of her husband's affair and describing him as controlling, manipulative, and fully capable of murder. Emma's testimony added a chilling layer to an already disturbing case. She recalled her father, James, coming home late after 10 p.m. on the night of Molly's death. He went straight to the shower, and soon after, the washing machine started running. The strong smell of bleach filled the house. Emma remembered how nervous and on edge he seemed, behaving uncharacteristically. He lingered near her, silently, watching, then eventually walked away. Melanie revealed that during Molly's murder, she was still married to James, living under the same roof, and believing her life was normal. She had no idea her husband was leading a double life, using a separate phone to communicate with another woman. By the early hours of April 28, 2018, Melanie was grappling with an avalanche of devastating revelations. She discovered that her husband of more than 20 years had been planning to marry another woman. James had even fraudulently signed a marriage license, claiming to be divorced. The fantasy life he had woven with Molly was built on deception and ultimately ended in violence. Melanie had been unaware of his infidelity, that he had told others she was dead, and that her name was used to invent a fabricated tragedy. On the night of the murder, James had left their house in blue jeans, a black jacket, and boots. The next day, after the police left, Melanie began searching their home. Something felt off. She noticed his black jacket was missing, questioned him about it, but never got an answer. Her search led her to the garage, where James had parked a maroon car, unusually inside rather than outside, where he normally left it. Her suspicion deepened. During his trial, James Addy refused to testify in his defense, but submitted a written statement, a love letter to Molly, the same woman he stood accused of murdering. This act felt either disturbingly delusional or deeply arrogant. Later, he requested a new trial, claiming inadequate defense representation and alleging that some evidence in his favor had been withheld. However, the jury was unmoved. In July 2021, James Addy was convicted of first-degree murder and armed criminal action. He received a life sentence without parole, plus an additional 10 years. To the end, he declared his innocence and vowed to appeal. Reports surfaced of James confessing to a fellow inmate, bluntly stating that he ended up in prison because someone ended up face down in a ditch. By then, the damage was irreparable. In April 2018, instead of celebrating a wedding, Molly's family and friends gathered to bury her. What should have been the start of her new life became the date now etched on her headstone. But the tragedies didn't end there. In the ensuing months, her parents, Timothy and Sandy Watson, also passed away, unable to bear the devastation of losing their daughter. Sandy experienced severe psychological trauma after Molly's murder, and her mental health rapidly declined. Timothy, who devoted himself to caring for his wife during this time, succumbed to a heart attack in September 2020. The relentless stress, grief, and sorrow had taken its toll on him as well. Neither of them lived to see justice done or hear the guilty verdict in the courtroom. They were not there to witness the man responsible for their daughter's death being led away in handcuffs. Meanwhile, Molly's son, Declan, was left without a mother. After her death, ensuring his care became a priority. Thankfully, he was placed with relatives who were raising him in a loving and supportive home. A small glimmer of hope in an otherwise heartbreaking story. Tim, Molly's brother, now acts as the spokesperson for their family. In court, he addressed the jury with not only grief, but also a profound sense of urgency. He spoke of the devastating impact of Molly's murder, how the loss of his younger sister had not only been a terrible shock, but had also brought with it the loss of his parents. He shared how his mother had succumbed to mental illness, his father had passed away from grief, and how the absence of his 3 loved ones had left a painful void in his life where there had once been joy. Tim implored the jury to deliver justice, emphasizing that Molly had dreams, a career, and a son. She had been a bright, passionate individual full of life, but everything was taken from her in a single, selfish act. Tim told the jury that James had mercilessly chosen to take Molly's life and urged them to deliver a verdict that showed no mercy to him in return. It was just after 4:30 in the morning when the tracking app on Sade Robinson's phone suddenly went dark. Earlier that night, she had left work, excited about her first date with a man she'd recently met. By sunrise, her car was in flames, and along the shores of Lake Michigan, something unimaginable was waiting to be discovered. Sade Robinson was born in 2004 in Vicksburg, Mississippi. She is the daughter of Sheena Scarborough and Carlos Robinson. Her life changed early on, when she was just a year old. Her parents separated. Sade then moved with her mother to Milwaukee, settling into her grandparents' home. This city would become the backdrop of her formative years, and the place where her vibrant personality began to bloom. From the start, Sade stood out. She was curious, energetic, and always eager to learn about the world around her. She approached every activity, from soccer to Girl Scouts, with great enthusiasm. These early experiences not only allowed her to shine, but also helped shape her natural skills in leadership, teamwork, and discipline. Though Sade's father lived in Florida, she maintained a close bond with him. Frequent visits between states became a routine part of her life, and through them, she developed a rare sense of independence and responsibility at a young age. As she grew older, Said's passions began to take clearer form. She was drawn to the arts, especially rap music and dance, where she could express herself freely. But her dreams weren't limited to the creative world. She also felt a deep desire to serve her country and envisioned herself someday joining the armed forces. Her academic record was equally impressive. Said was known as a standout student, always focused and determined. Yet, even with her achievements, she wasn't immune to challenges. During 7th grade, she encountered difficulties at school. As a result, she made the brave decision to relocate to Florida and live with her father, seeking a fresh start. Once again, Said showed resilience in her new environment. She continued to excel, both socially and academically. Teachers and peers alike admired her focus, her ambition, and her quiet confidence, one that was rooted in strength rather than pride. In 2019, after spending several years in Florida, she returned to Milwaukee to live with her mother. When her final year of high school arrived in 2021, Said poured herself into her studies, managing to graduate an entire semester early, yet another example of her unwavering determination. By 2024, at just 19 years old, Said Robinson embodied a rare blend of discipline, ambition, and independence. She was pursuing a degree in art at Milwaukee Area Technical College, balancing her education with 2 full-time jobs. But her ambitions didn't stop there. She had already set her sights on a future in criminal law. Through sheer effort and careful, Said was able to accomplish a major milestone. She bought her own car. It was more than just a vehicle. It represented her growing independence. Not long after, she moved out of her mother's home and rented her very own apartment. She balanced 2 demanding jobs to support herself. One of them was at Pizza Shuttle, where her work ethic, discipline, and initiative didn't go unnoticed. She quickly rose through the ranks and was promoted to manager. Her second job was at the prestigious Wisconsin Country Club, where she also helped her younger sister secure a position, making sure her sibling had access to the same opportunities that had shaped her own path. At that moment, her future looked incredibly bright. She had clear goals, the discipline to chase them, and the kind of maturity most people twice her age hadn't yet reached. Yet, behind all of that strength and focus, Said still carried the hopes of any young woman her age. She dreamed of love, companionship, and a meaningful connection. What she never expected was that this search would lead her into the most dangerous moment of her life. April 1st, 2024 began like any other day for Saad. She started her morning shift at Pizza Shuttle, as she often did, took a few moments before work to catch up with her mother over FaceTime. Everything about the day seemed routine until the end of her shift. Said was excited because she had a date planned that evening with a man she had recently met through a dating app. She left work to meet him. That would be the last time anyone in her group would see or hear from her. The following day, April 2nd, Said didn't show up for her shift. She hadn't called in sick or left a message, which was completely out of character. Concern quickly spread among her co-workers. They began texting and calling her, hoping for an explanation, but there was no reply. Her family and close friends also began to worry. None of them had heard from her since the day before. As hours passed without a word, worry turned into panic. Those closest to her knew something was wrong. This was a chilling and inexplicable silence. As night fell and still no answers emerged, one of Said's friends made the police and report her missing. Before doing so, she checked Said's most recent social media activity and found something crucial: a Snapchat post of Saad. The timestamp was around 9 p.m. on the night of April 1st. That would be the final digital trace Saad left behind. On April 3rd, with no updates and mounting concern, police officers went to Saad's apartment. They knocked on the door, but there was no answer and no sounds from within. Unbeknownst to them, authorities elsewhere in the city had already made a horrifying discovery. At around 7:30 a.m. on April 2nd, 2024, the Milwaukee Fire Department received a report from local residents about a car on fire. When emergency crews arrived, they found thick smoke and flames engulfing a 2020 Honda Civic. The vehicle had been abandoned and was burning rapidly. Firefighters managed to contain the blaze. No one was inside the car, but the contents of the trunk raised immediate concern. A black coat, a pair of ripped jeans, and other women's clothing, charred but still identifiable. A cell phone, partially damaged by heat, was also recovered. The authorities now had physical evidence, but they still needed to know who the car belonged to. That answer would come soon, and it would change everything. Later that same day, Milwaukee County Sheriff's deputies were called to a different location. A man waiting for a friend had been walking along the edge of a park's beach when he stumbled upon something horrifying, a human leg lying near the shoreline. Forensic teams were called in, and after careful analysis, they determined the leg belonged to an African-American female. The remains were dismembered, but the condition of the limbs suggested the crime had occurred recently. As the investigation into Sade's disappearance continued, one of the officers who had earlier visited her apartment learned of the discovery of the human remains. The physical description of the remains closely matched the details provided in the missing persons report for Sade. Then, a second chilling confirmation arrived. The Honda Civic found burning that morning was registered to Sade Robinson. With the pieces beginning to fall into place, detectives returned to her apartment. They spoke with the building's maintenance worker, who revealed that he had seen Sade on the morning of April 1st. She seemed excited and said she was looking forward to a date after her shift. Investigators pulled the building's surveillance footage, which showed Sade leaving her apartment at 9 p.m. On April 1st, she never returned. That footage, combined with the evidence from the car and the park, created an urgent new direction for the case. Authorities subpoenaed her phone records from her mobile carrier and traced her last text message to a number with a 262 area code. They didn't yet know who the number belonged to, but the content of the exchange made it clear it was the man she had planned to meet that night. Using that lead, police began cross-referencing phone data with surveillance footage. It soon emerged that Sade and her date had met at a local venue called the Twisted Fisherman. Footage from the bar and witness statements from staff confirmed their presence there that evening. Another key piece of evidence came from the same friend who had filed the missing persons report. She revealed that she had access to Sade's location through an app called Life 360, commonly used to track friends and family in real time. According to the app's log, the last known location for Sade Robinson was Warnemont Park at 4:30 a.m. on April 2nd. A clearer timeline began to take shape. Investigators learned that she was originally scheduled to meet her date at 5 p.m. on April 1st at a place called Brad House. However, at the last minute, the man changed the location to a different venue, Twisted Fisherman, a bar where he had previously worked. He claimed he needed to stop by to pick up some paperwork. Sade had no objection. At 5:20 p.m., she arrived at Twisted Fisherman. He was already there, waiting at the bar. The two sat side by side, ordered drinks and food, and chatted casually as the evening unfolded. Just over an hour later, they left the bar together, got into Sade's car, and drove to a second location, Duke's, another bar. They spent roughly 3 hours at Duke's before heading to a residential neighborhood in southwestern Milwaukee, where they remained for several more hours. At some point in the early morning hours of April 2nd, Sade's phone showed movement again, this time heading toward Warnemont Park. At 4:35, her Life 360 tracking app went silent. The battery had died. That was the last signal the phone would ever send. All signs pointed to one horrifying conclusion. Sade Robinson had been murdered, and the person she had trusted enough to meet that night was now the prime suspect. Thanks to swift and coordinated work by law enforcement, the investigation progressed rapidly. Authorities had already zeroed in on one individual. Though his name was still unknown to the public, police knew he was the last person to see Sade alive. The evidence they had gathered was enough to obtain both an arrest warrant and a search warrant for the residence traced from Said's phone activity. On April 4th at 1 p.m., officers moved in. They arrived at the suspect's home and took him into custody. His identity was finally confirmed. Maxwell Anderson, a 33-year-old man and the son of a well-known businessman in the region. Following his arrest, disturbing details about his background began to emerge. Throughout his life, Anderson had exhibited a pattern of problematic behavior. His own father had once tried to help him by giving him a position in the family business, but eventually fired him, stating that he was unfit for the job. Anderson was also a U.S. Navy veteran, but in recent years he had drifted from one job to the next, working primarily as a bartender in various establishments across Milwaukee. None of the positions lasted long. Between 2014 and 2019, he had multiple arrests on record, mostly for minor offenses such as public disorder and disturbances. Investigators worked to determine exactly how Said and Anderson first met. The initial assumption was that they had connected through a dating app, but another theory surfaced. They may have crossed paths in person at one of the bars where Anderson had worked, locations that Said and her friends were known to frequent. Following the arrest of Maxwell Anderson, detectives launched an extensive search of his residence. What they found inside confirmed their worst fears. In one of the bedrooms, investigators discovered bloodstains on the bedding and on a wall leading down to the basement. That area, they soon realized, held even more disturbing clues. Inside the basement, they located multiple gas canisters and electric saws, items that raised immediate suspicion. The basement wasn't just a storage area, it appeared to have been prepared for something dark, something planned. The space, now a central point in the investigation, suggested that the crime against Said had been both premeditated and executed with chilling precision. The search for evidence did not stop there. On April 6th, just days after the house search, investigators returned to the area where Said's burned car had been discovered. Just 1 block away, they made another gruesome find: a human foot. The skin tone, size, and pink nail polish matched the severed leg recovered earlier. It belonged to Said. Meanwhile, detectives continued to comb through surveillance footage near the scene of the car fire. It was here they uncovered a critical piece of evidence. Security cameras captured Maxwell Anderson stepping out of Said's Honda Civic moments before setting it ablaze. Several bystanders in the area at the time later identified him as the man responsible. After starting the fire, Anderson was seen calmly walking away and boarding a nearby bus. But perhaps the most chilling revelation came from a key witness who knew Anderson personally. Alarmed by the news of Said's disappearance, this individual immediately went to the police. What they shared would reshape the entire investigation. A month before the crime, on March 5th, Anderson had allegedly described a plan to lure a woman to his basement, shoot her, dismember her body, and scatter the remains across the city. At the time, it seemed like a disturbing joke. In retrospect, it was a blueprint. The witness went on to describe a visit to Anderson's house just days before the murder. The basement, they said, was covered in plastic sheeting. There were 3 saws in plain view, a large tarp, and an area staged with intimate objects, further suggesting the calculated nature of the crime. Authorities feared there could be additional victims and began re-examining other reports linked to Anderson. In February 2024, a woman came forward claiming that after meeting Anderson at a bar, he invited her to his home. Once there, she began to feel unwell, leading her to suspect he had drugged her drink. She escaped before anything could happen. That escape may have saved her life. With mounting evidence, physical, digital, and testimonial, the prosecution built a powerful case. On April 12th, just 10 days after Said Robinson vanished, Maxwell Anderson was formally charged with first-degree intentional homicide, mutilation of a corpse, and arson to conceal a crime. Though Anderson continued to claim innocence, the case against him was overwhelming. On the morning of June 6, 2025, The courtroom in Milwaukee was silent and tense. Families, reporters, and community members filled every seat. After months of grief, outrage, and unanswered questions, the moment had finally arrived. The jury had reached its decision. It took less than a day of deliberation. By 9:00 a.m. the next morning, their verdict was ready. Maxwell Anderson found guilty on all counts. First-degree intentional homicide, mutilation of a corpse, hiding a corpse, arson. It was official. The man who had lured 19-year-old Sade Robinson on a first date only to brutally kill and dismember her was now legally responsible for one of the most horrifying crimes Milwaukee had ever seen. The trial had laid bare every excruciating detail. Jurors were shown hundreds of surveillance images and forensic photographs. They listened to the testimony of dozens of witnesses. They saw snapshots of Sade in her final hours, alive, vulnerable, and unaware of the fate awaiting her. The prosecutor made the case clear. Sade was killed inside Anderson's home. He later dismembered her body, her remains, legs, arms, torso, even her right breast were scattered across counties. Some were found in the lake, others washed ashore, and in an attempt to erase it all, he set her car ablaze and walked away. Maxwell Anderson did not testify, and his defense team called no witnesses. His lawyer claimed the murder wasn't planned. However, the evidence suggested otherwise, revealing a sequence of events that started like any other night but culminated in horrifying violence. Sade Robinson was ambitious and full of potential. She was a student at Milwaukee Area Technical College, held 2 jobs, and was actively shaping her future. That future was taken from her. Now, justice has been served. Sentencing is scheduled for August 15th, but for her loved ones, the real sentence is something far greater: life without her. On August 16th, 2023, a young woman was admitted to the Mayo Clinic, one of the top medical centers in the world, in critical condition. Her internal organs were failing quickly. She was severely dehydrated, and her body temperature was unstable. Despite the emergency treatments, doctors were having a hard time stabilizing her because they could not identify the cause of her sudden decline. Betty Bowman, a successful pharmacist known for her commitment to health and wellness, was now fighting for her life. Her colleagues were stunned. Just the day before, she had been vibrant and energetic. Now medical professionals were urgently trying to save her. One by one, possible diagnoses were eliminated. Lab tests did not yield clear results, and her condition kept deteriorating. What could have led to such a swift decline in the health of a young, otherwise healthy woman? As doctors sought answers, they started to understand that the cause was not a typical illness. Betty was born in 1991 in Kansas. She grew up in a hard-working family that valued honesty, perseverance, and care for one another. From a young age, she showed determination and a strong work ethic in all her endeavors. She performed well in school, particularly excelling in science, developed a deep passion for biology and chemistry. After high school, she enrolled in a pharmacy program at university, where she quickly became one of the top students. Unlike many of her classmates who focused on memorizing theories, Betty was truly interested in medical processes, chemical compounds, and how medications affect the human body. After graduation, she started her career working in a pharmacy before moving to a medical facility. There, she earned the respect of her co-workers and built a reputation as a dedicated, knowledgeable professional. Connor Bowman was born in 1993 in Kansas, but his upbringing was quite different from Betty's. He was self-centered and strategic, often manipulating others to achieve his goals. Unlike Betty, he did not value hard work and integrity. Instead, he aimed to gain the most benefit with the least effort. Academically, Connor was not exceptional in school, but his charisma and quick thinking helped him handle challenging situations smoothly. He had a talent for winning over important people and presenting himself positively, choosing a career in pharmaceuticals. He attended the same university as Betty. However, his interest in medicine was not aligned with that of his peers. While they wanted to help others, Connor approached pharmacology with a focus on influence and control over the human body. Later, he pursued further education in a medical program to open up more career opportunities, elevate his professional standing. Betty and Connor met while studying at university. Despite their differing personalities, they formed a relationship. Betty admired Connor for his intelligence and ambition, while Connor appreciated the advantages of being with her. They got married in May 2021. A few months later, Betty received a job offer from the prestigious Mayo Clinic, prompting them to move to Minnesota. For Betty, this was a significant career advancement, but for Connor, it meant living in the shadow of his successful wife. At that time, he was still in school, and all financial responsibilities fell on Betty. She paid for their living expenses, his education, and daily costs. Connor did not work and depended entirely on his wife's support, eventually growing comfortable with this dynamic. As time went on, Betty's focus shifted more towards her career. She made new friends and thrived professionally, while Connor began to feel insecure and sidelined. Although they seemed like a successful couple on the surface, tension was brewing beneath. Over time, Betty started to suspect that Connor had developed deeper feelings for someone else. When she discovered the truth, her suspicions were confirmed. It wasn't just a casual affair, but genuine affection. This revelation became the breaking point for Betty, leading her to decide on a divorce. To her, it made sense, but for Connor, it meant losing his comfortable lifestyle and financial stability. He realized that post-divorce, he would be starting from scratch with debts and no safety net. Divorce wasn't in his plans. He considered another option that promised both freedom and financial gain. On August 10, 2023, Betty Bowman was at her home in Rochester, Minnesota. She had invited a close friend over for the evening to relax, catch up, and take a break from work. It had been some time since they last met. Both were excited to spend time together. Connor was also home that evening, but he typically did not join these gatherings. He usually kept to himself, showed little interest in Betty's conversations with her friends, and preferred to focus on his own activities. That day, Connor was behaving unusually. Out of the blue, he offered to make smoothies, which surprised Betty. He had never shown interest in cooking or care for her meals before. Household chores always fell to her. This unexpected gesture felt out of character for him. Connor went into the kitchen, collected the ingredients, and began making the drinks. Betty's friend noticed his excitement and was slightly surprised, but didn't give it much thought. Betty also didn't question it, although suggested something was off about his behavior. A few minutes later, he came back with 2 glasses. When Betty took a sip, she quickly realized something was wrong. The drink had a bitter, slightly salty aftertaste that felt unusual. She frowned, perplexed by the strange flavor. Her friend, intrigued by the reaction, decided to give it a try too. The taste was indeed horrible, and the smoothie was ruined. However, no one considered what might have caused the bad flavor. They just set the glasses aside and moved on. Connor didn't offer any explanation. He didn't suggest making another batch, didn't explain the strange taste, and showed no interest in the fact that the drink was undrinkable. Betty quickly brushed off the incident, thinking he simply made a bad smoothie. However, it wasn't an accident. It was actually the first attempt, which failed because she hadn't finished the drink. Connor recognized his error and realized that next time he needed to ensure it turned out better. On August 14, 2023, everything appeared normal at the Bowman home. Betty returned late from a long day at work, feeling exhausted after spending hours in the lab, discussing new pharmaceutical research with her colleagues. She just wanted to relax, have a quick dinner, and get some rest. Connor recognized this was a crucial moment for him. His first attempt a few days earlier had failed because the taste was too evident. He had learned from his mistakes and was determined to be more careful this time. Throughout the day, he researched how the added substance would affect the body and calculated the precise amount needed to induce a severe reaction without immediate effects. He waited for the perfect moment when Betty was tired and less likely to notice anything unusual. When she entered the kitchen, he casually offered her a smoothie. He acted relaxed, to avoid arousing her suspicion. Betty accepted the glass, took a few sips, and finished the smoothie calmly. This time, the taste seemed perfectly normal. Connor had thoughtfully adjusted the ingredients to hide any unusual flavors. That evening, Betty started to feel unwell. She felt a bit tired and had a mild headache. Thinking it wasn't serious, she didn't think much of it. However, by the morning of August 15th, her condition had deteriorated. She woke up with a severe headache, nausea, and extreme exhaustion. Shortly after, she began to have serious stomach problems. Her body was losing fluids quickly, and even a small sip of water made her feel sick again. By midday, Betty's condition had worsened. She struggled to get out of bed, feeling as if her body was heavy. Her temperature was gow, and her muscles hurt. By evening, her weakness intensified to the point where walking to the bathroom became difficult. She was very dehydrated, and she kept feeling sick. Every time she tried to eat, she felt even worse. On August 16th, she recognized that she could no longer take care of herself. She felt so weak that even a simple phone call was tiring. She contacted the Mayo Clinic to explain her symptoms. Later that day, Betty Bowman was admitted to the hospital in critical condition. She was dangerously dehydrated. Her blood pressure was unstable, and she had a high temperature. Doctors quickly initiated a thorough evaluation, but they could not determine the cause. Initial tests indicated severe complications affecting her internal organs. The most alarming finding was in her intestines, where scans showed areas of dead tissue. This meant that parts of her digestive tract were not getting enough oxygen and had started to die. Emergency surgery was performed to remove the damaged part of her body, but doctors were uncertain if the issue had spread further. After the surgery, she was placed in intensive care and connected to life support machines. Unfortunately, her condition worsened. Within hours, her kidneys began to fail, and she needed dialysis. The situation escalated when, on August 18th, her liver also showed signs of trouble. Tests revealed a significant increase in liver enzymes indicating toxic damage. The medical team was perplexed by Betty's condition. She was a young, healthy woman without any history of chronic illness. Why was her health deteriorating so rapidly? During this time, Connor Bowman showed unusual determination. He often told doctors that his wife had a rare genetic condition called hemophagocytic lymphohistiocytosis, HLH. This was odd because HLH usually appears in early childhood, and Betty had never shown any symptoms of it. The doctors looked into her medical history and found no signs of the condition. Even more alarming, Connor was informing friends and family that Betty was dying from this disease, even though the medical team had not diagnosed her with it. On August 19th, Betty's health took a severe turn for the worse as she experienced multiple organ failure. Her heart, kidneys, and liver stopped functioning properly, and fluid built up in her lungs, making it hard for her to breathe. Despite the doctor's best efforts, the situation looked dire. On August 20th, 2023, at 2:50 p.m., Betty Bowman, 32, was declared dead. The medical team could not determine the exact cause of her death. However, her husband's lack of questions and his behavior raised some concerns. He did not seem to seek answers, inquire about possible causes, or request further examination. Instead, he appeared to act as if he already anticipated the outcome. After Betty's death, doctors recommended an autopsy because Betty's unexpected decline was puzzling, and standard protocols call for a post-mortem examination. However, Connor firmly opposed this. He asserted that Betty had always expressed a desire not to have her body used for medical research. This declaration surprised the staff at the Mayo Clinic, as it is common for families to seek answers when someone who seemed healthy dies suddenly. Most families typically request additional tests and clarifications. In contrast, Connor was resolute in insisting that no autopsy be conducted and that there should be no further investigation. Law enforcement officers involved in the case noted that his behavior was suspicious. He not only refused an autopsy, but also rushed to make funeral arrangements. Just hours after Betty's death, he submitted the cremation paperwork and wanted it done quickly. However, doctors stepped in because they were not convinced her death was from natural causes. They decided to pause the cremation to conduct further investigations. The next day, Connor began writing an obituary, which revealed another strange aspect of the case. He did not mention Betty's mother and sister, the two people closest to her. Instead, he only referenced himself and their dog. This made it seem like he was intentionally downplaying Betty's family ties, almost trying to erase parts of her life. Around this time, Connor invited an acquaintance over for drinks. The acquaintance later noted that they had expected to find a grieving husband in distress. However, when they arrived at the house, they saw Connor looking relaxed and even cheerful. During their conversation, he showed no signs of sadness, didn't mention what had happened, and seemed unfazed for someone who had just lost his wife days earlier. Just days after the funeral, Connor started openly talking about the $500,000 life insurance payout he received after his wife's death. It seemed like he was satisfied with how things had turned out. Many people respected Betty both professionally and personally. Those close to her expected her husband to be deeply affected by her loss. However, he appeared relaxed. Some who overheard his discussions noted that he talked about the insurance money as if it had resolved his financial issues instead of representing the loss of his wife. Investigators became particularly interested in Connor's financial situation after discovering that he had been facing considerable debt while in school. He had accumulated substantial student loans that continued to increase. Unlike Betty, who had a stable and well-paying job, Connor was financially dependent. As he was still completing his medical training, his residence salary was insufficient to meet their expenses. As investigators examined his behavior following Betty's death, more troubling details came to light. Even before he received the insurance payout, he did not try to find other sources of income and showed no concern for his financial future. This raised questions. If Betty's death had truly been unexpected, shouldn't he have been eager to find answers? Wouldn't he have asked the doctors questions, sought explanations, or requested additional tests? Instead, he appeared to act as if he already knew what had happened, suggesting that any further inquiry would only complicate things for him. Detectives ultimately determined that Connor's financial difficulties could have been a significant motive for the crime. He had a strong incentive to benefit from his wife's death, as he stood to gain much more financially than he would have from a divorce. Friends and family of Betty were shocked that someone so close to her could plan such a cruel act for financial gain. Connor's behavior, his emotional detachment, and his financial problems suggested that Betty's death may not have been an accident. Investigators collected blood samples from Betty taken during her hospital stay. The tests revealed a startling finding. Her blood contained a dangerously high level of colchicine, a substance used in medical treatments that can be fatal in large amounts. Colchicine is not commonly linked to intentional poisoning, as it is hard to obtain without professional access. It is mainly used to treat gout, but its toxic effects can be very harmful if misused. The symptoms of an overdose aligned perfectly with Betty's condition, starting with nausea, stomach problems, and weakness, and progressing to organ failure and intestinal necrosis. After obtaining this information, investigators started to explore who might have access to the substance. Their investigation soon pointed to Connor Bowman. With a medical background, he possessed the knowledge to use colchicine effectively. Even more alarmingly, he had previously worked at a poison control center, studying how toxic compounds affect the human body. This finding was the first significant clue suggesting he could be linked to the incident. Detectives began interviewing Betty's friends and family. Her close friend, who was at Betty's house on August 10th, recounted a peculiar incident involving a smoothie. The friend noted that the drink tasted bitter and slightly salty. Initially, they both thought the smoothie had simply spoiled. She also remembered joking at the time that Connor might have tampered with the drink. They laughed off the remark then, but now it felt much more serious. This detail caught the investigators' attention, as it suggested that someone might have attempted to poison Betty even before she was hospitalized. If the first attempt had a low dose, it seemed reasonable to believe that Connor might have tried again, using a stronger concentration of the substance. Betty's family, including her mother and sister, revealed that in the weeks before her death, she had been seriously thinking about getting a divorce. They recalled her expressing unhappiness in her marriage and her intention to separate. All the evidence suggests that Betty's death might not have been a tragic accident, but instead a carefully planned crime. After confirming the presence of colchicine in Betty's system, investigators sought additional evidence. They secured permission to search Connor's workspace at the Mayo Clinic, where he was completing his medical residency. A review of his work computer uncovered troubling information. His browser history included searches like lethal dose of colchicine, how to hide traces of poison, can police track search history, and how to erase purchase records on Amazon. These searches were significant to the investigation, suggesting that Connor had researched fatal dosages beforehand and was actively looking for ways to conceal his actions. Investigators looking into Connor Bowman's online accounts found that he had bought substances not connected to his medical practice. These substances included colchicine and sodium nitrate, raising further alarm. Although sodium nitrate is often used in the chemical and food sectors, it can be toxic in higher doses. The investigators determined that Connor was experimenting with various compounds, trying to find a subtle method to harm his wife without attracting attention. The investigation also revealed that Connor was claiming to be a widower on the dating app Bumble even before his wife's death. A woman who met him on September 5th reported to investigators that she asked him if it was appropriate to flirt with someone else after his wife's passing. Connor said it was a good question and that he was open to dating again. He expressed that he knew what he wanted in life and believed that Betty would have wanted him to move on and be happy. The documents state that he told her his wife had died from listeria poisoning earlier in the summer. Additionally, another woman who met Bowman on August 29th, just 9 days after Betty's death, found it odd when he mentioned a significant life insurance payout he received, which he used to pay off his student loans. On October 20th, 2023, authorities issued an arrest warrant for Connor Bowman. By then, there was substantial evidence against him, including lab reports, his search history on his work computer, and his suspicious behavior after Betty's death. He was arrested in the early morning at his home in Rochester, Minnesota. Officers arrived with the warrant, and Bowman was taken into custody without putting up a fight. He remained calm and showed no aggression, but he also did not try to defend himself, which caught the attention of investigators. The court set Bowman's bail at $2 million, but he could not afford to pay it. After his arrest, his financial situation changed dramatically. His accounts were frozen and his assets were investigated without access to his funds. He stayed in custody while waiting for his trial. Meanwhile, investigators worked to collect more evidence to fully understand the crime. They looked into his communications, financial records, and relationships with colleagues and acquaintances to identify potential motives, find any additional incriminating information. The legal process was just starting, but it was already evident that Connor Bowman would face justice. After his arrest, Betty's family and friends called for the toughest punishment available. They were certain that her death was the result of a premeditated crime. They sought a life sentence, convinced that someone who could commit such a deliberate act should never be released. The prosecution was diligent in building a strong case, making sure the evidence was compelling and undeniable. Although the trial had not begun yet, the evidence clearly indicated Connor's guilt. Betty's family endured a painful wait for justice. They found it hard to accept that someone she had trusted, who had been in her life for many years, had betrayed her in such a devastating manner. Her mother and sister remembered conversations where Betty had shared her unhappiness and her desire to move on, never expecting that things would turn out so tragically. Betty's friends played an important role in the case. Several of them served as witnesses, sharing valuable testimony and information that strengthened the investigation. They supported her family in their quest for justice, ensuring that the responsible individual would be held accountable. Connor Bowman was charged with second-degree murder in the summer of 2023 in the death of Betty Bowman, but a grand jury indicted him on first-degree murder in January 2024. Connor Bowman's trial has not happened yet. The law enforcement is still collecting evidence and getting ready for the court case. However, a trial date has not been established. The relationship between parents and their adult children is affected by various factors that start to develop during childhood. One of the most important factors is parenting style, which can foster trust, cooperation, and support, or, conversely, cause control and strict discipline. The McCullough family initially appeared to be a typical middle-class family, educated, financially secure. The strict parents raised 5 children, teaching them what they believed were proper morals and life goals. However, the children had a different view. As they grew older, they moved away and kept in touch with their aging parents only occasionally through text messages. They did not know that both of their parents had unexpectedly passed away 4 years ago. The truth emerged only when the family's doctor expressed concerns. The McCullough family resided in a large 3-story house in a peaceful upper-middle-class neighborhood in Great Baddow, Essex, England. The family was led by John McCullough, a respected professor at a prestigious university known for his research on autism spectrum disorders. His wife, Lois, dedicated herself to maintaining a well-organized home and raising their children. In October 1988, they welcomed their youngest child, a daughter named Virginia. At that time, both parents were in their 40s. Although Virginia's arrival was unexpected, the McCullough viewed it as a blessing due to their strong religious beliefs. The McCullough children were raised in a strict environment filled with discipline. Their household followed a rigid schedule, with each child responsible for specific tasks. Disobedience often resulted in physical punishment. For instance, Lois once used a belt on her child so harshly that the girl ended up with visible bruises, which led child welfare services to investigate the McCullough home. Even after many years together, Lois and John reportedly did not show much affection for each other. They slept in separate bedrooms, communicated in a reserved manner, and did not display any tenderness, such as hugs or kisses. This lack of affection extended to their children. The McCulloughs seldom expressed warmth or praise, as they believed it would spoil their kids. Instead, they commonly punished minor infractions. The children were expected to excel academically and help with household chores, but they were not allowed to visit friends or have guests over. Discipline was strictly enforced, and breaking the rules was not tolerated. Lois faced obsessive-compulsive disorder from a young age, along with misophobia, the fear of germs and dirt. This resulted in her compulsive cleaning and frequent disinfection of her home. Pets were not allowed, and her children were required to keep their rooms to her strict standards. Lois would often conduct surprise checks. Any hint of dust or disorder would lead to harsh punishments. As time went on, her mental health worsened. She became even more withdrawn, avoiding interaction with neighbors completely. She only left the house when necessary and rushed back as soon as she could. In her later years, she stopped making eye contact and kept her head down to minimize interactions. In addition to her existing fears, she developed agoraphobia, which left her nearly unable to leave her home. John, Lois's husband, had diabetes, which caused his eyesight to deteriorate quickly. By his 70s, he had retired from teaching and was living on a small pension. Similar to Lois, John rarely went out. When he did run errands, he often didn't greet others, not because he was rude, but because he struggled to recognize faces due to his poor vision unless someone spoke to him directly. Once the older children became adults, they moved out of the McCullough household and spread across the country. They created their own lives and families, keeping in touch with their parents mainly through occasional phone calls or, more commonly, text messages. This pattern illustrated the emotional distance within the McCullough family, as they did not have a tradition of celebrating holidays together or marking special occasions at home. For the grown children, it was sufficient to know that their parents were well taken care of by their youngest sibling, who continued to live in the family home. Virginia, the youngest of the McCullough children, stood apart from her older sisters. Unlike them, she didn't rush to leave home after high school. From a young age, Virginia was seen as odd and introverted. While her siblings had limited social lives due to their parents' strict rules, such as prohibiting guests and outings, Virginia took her isolation further. She found it difficult to connect even with her brothers and sisters. Instead of engaging with others, she often talked to herself and created complex stories which were mistaken for real events, leading others to label her a compulsive liar. However, she didn't seem bothered by her lack of social connections. Her parents believed that Virginia was destined by a higher power to care for them in their old age. Her absence of a personal life, lack of dating, and tendency to avoid people were seen as completely normal by Lois and John. They accepted her role as their caregiver as her true calling. It is uncertain whether Virginia pursued any formal education after high school, but it seems likely as her parents valued education highly. However, she struggled to maintain a stable career due to her unusual behavior and tendency to be dishonest. At one point, Virginia worked as a bartender at a local pub and also had a job at the post office. But mostly she spent her time at home, assisting her parents with household tasks. Whenever her parents asked why she wasn't working, Virginia had convincing explanations. She claimed to have been unfairly dismissed, was actively job hunting, or was waiting for a response from a large company that had reviewed her application. As her parents aged, they became increasingly less worried about her situation. By the time John was in his 70s, his vision had significantly declined. He had almost no sight in one eye and blurred vision in the other. Lois's anxiety had also intensified over the years, and she only ventured out for medical appointments with their family therapist, who managed their health and adjusted their treatments. Lois and John seldom interacted with neighbors and appeared to be content with their lifestyle, especially knowing Virginia would always be there to look after them. Virginia spent a significant amount of time on the computer, mostly playing games. She told her parents she was actively seeking work and sending out her resume to various companies. However, as time went on, she was unable to secure a job. To continue living off her parents without earning their disapproval, she devised a plan to elicit their pity instead. Knowing her parents were very concerned about health, they regularly went for medical checkups and took their medications on time. Virginia began to complain about her own health, fabricating serious conditions she didn't have. To make her claims more convincing, she visited doctors and described symptoms she found online. She underwent various tests and blood work, but none of her conditions were ever confirmed. She told her parents she was diagnosed with diabetes, which she claimed to have inherited from her father, along with heart problems. She also mentioned having a tumor that required urgent surgery. Concerned for her well-being, John and Lois provided her with money for treatment. In 2017, Virginia unexpectedly announced her pregnancy but never disclosed who the father was. John and Lois were taken aback by the news but were willing to embrace an illegitimate grandchild. They reasoned that their daughter, who was nearly 30 and single, could use someone to care for after they were gone. However, Virginia's deception escalated. She even purchased a fake pregnancy belly online to maintain the charade, but after a few months, she claimed to feel unwell and went to the hospital. Upon her return, she told her parents that she had lost the baby. John and Lois grieved this loss, unaware that their daughter had merely tricked them. Virginia asked her parents if she could take full control of their finances and accounts. Since her parents didn't understand modern technology and rarely left their home, they agreed. This decision gave Virginia complete access to the family accounts and bank cards, allowing her to use them however she wanted. At that time, Virginia had developed a habit of impulsive shopping. Now she had the means to support it. Every day, she ordered various unnecessary items from online stores, with most of them never even being opened. She would stash the packages away in a closet, under her bed, or in the storage room. However, there was one purchase, a kitchen appliance, that she gave to her mother. and it was well received. Her mother appreciated the gift genuinely, even praised Virginia, which was a rare occurrence. In early 2018, Virginia suddenly believed she was an artist, turned her room into an art studio, filled with paints, an easel, and supplies. She told her parents that art experts had praised her work, that her paintings would be shown in a contemporary art gallery soon. She even claimed she would become famous and make a lot of money. However, from the mid-2000s to the mid-2010s, Virginia started visiting online casino sites regularly, where she placed bets and lost money. Over time, her gambling problem worsened. After accessing her parents' savings, she began increasing her bets until she lost all their money. John and Lois were unaware that they were nearly bankrupt. They couldn't check their account balance because they didn't have access to online banking. At that time, Virginia had begun taking out loans using their names, indulging in frivolous purchases and gambling away their savings. This situation couldn't continue indefinitely. No one was making payments on the loans, and as Virginia kept borrowing more money, their debt continued to increase along with the accumulating interest. One day, the bank called their home phone, and John answered. They informed him about the large debts and unpaid loans. John felt faint, nearly had a heart attack upon hearing this news. He immediately told his wife. Together, they went to confront their daughter, Virginia, demanding an explanation. Virginia, pretending to be surprised, promised them that she would investigate the issue. She then sat at her computer, typed for a few minutes, claimed that hackers had accessed her account, stolen their money, and taken out loans in their name. Virginia assured her parents that she would resolve the problem and that they would recover their stolen money within the next few months. She pretended to be active and told her parents she had reported the criminals to the police, assuring them that they would be caught and everything would be returned. Virginia claimed that the issue had been solved, stating that the money was back in their account and that there were no loans to worry about for a while. John and Lois felt relieved, but 6 months later, they were contacted again about their accumulating debts. This time, Virginia convinced them that there had been a mistake in the bank's system and incorrect information had been shared. She was very convincing. Her elderly parents trusted her once more. Virginia realized that her situation was not sustainable. She had been borrowing money and understood that the bank would eventually demand repayment. Her parents would continue to receive calls, raising more questions about her financial situation. Sooner or later, they would see through her lies. If she continued to deceive them, they might even take the drastic step of contacting the authorities to find out what was really happening with their finances. Virginia carefully considered how she could continue living in her parents' house, using their money and taking loans in their names without facing any consequences. Surprisingly, her older siblings were completely oblivious to the situation. They rarely called their parents and visited them even less. In the meantime, John and Lois never expressed any concerns or complaints to their children. By March 2019, the situation had reached a critical point. Virginia realized she needed to take decisive action. Tragically, her plan was disturbing. She decided to kill her elderly parents. She knew she had to do this covertly, ensuring that no one would suspect anything and that everyone would continue to believe John and Lois were living happily in their spacious home. Fortunately, since they had always been reclusive, it was unlikely that the neighbors would notice anything amiss. Due to chronic health issues, Lois and John often needed various medications, and Virginia was in charge of managing their prescriptions. However, Virginia began to change the dosages of her mother's sedatives, blood pressure medications, and psychiatric drugs over several months without their knowledge. In doing so, she secretly harmed her parents while closely monitoring how they responded to the altered medications. Lois and John, believing their health issues were just typical seasonal problems and trusting their daughter, did not seek medical help for their worsening condition. They thought their symptoms would resolve on their own since they had experienced similar issues in the past. In early June 2019, Virginia collected enough strong prescription medications to potentially kill both her parents. she purchased a sharp kitchen knife along with tools for crushing pills. On June 17, 2019, Virginia made the decision that this would be the final day for her father and mother. She acted normally, making sure not to raise any suspicions. She prepared dinner, went shopping, and assisted her mother with various household tasks. In the evening, she sat with her parents while they watched television and later made them a lethal cocktail that would ensure they wouldn't wake up the next day. Her father sometimes enjoyed a small amount of strong alcohol from his collection of expensive bottles, which he had spent years accumulating. Now, in retirement, he took pleasure in tasting different drinks from his collection. Virginia mixed a deadly dose of heart medication into a bottle of aged whiskey. The alcohol concealed the bitter taste of the pills. However, her mother, Lois, did not drink alcohol. For her mother, Virginia prepared herbal tea and claimed the unusual bitterness came from medicinal herbs that were harmless. Lois, however, chose not to finish the tea. After drinking, John went to his room and Virginia assisted him, wishing him good night. She left her mother's tea on the bedside table, hoping Lois would drink it before heading to her own room. Virginia glanced at her mother through the partially open door before going to bed. That night, she slept peacefully, without any feelings of guilt or doubt. The next morning, she took her time and stayed under the covers until almost 11, a rare luxury in their household. She figured that if no one had come by to check on her and tell her to get up by that time, no one would. First, she entered her father's room and found him in bed, appearing to be peacefully asleep. When Virginia touched his hand, she realized it was cold and stiff, indicating that he had died shortly after going to sleep. His heart couldn't cope with the mixture of medications and alcohol, leading to his passing. Next, Virginia entered her mother's bedroom and discovered that Lois hadn't finished her drink. Although she was alive, Lois was unable to get out of bed because of the heavy sedatives she had taken. She felt disoriented and confused, struggling to understand her surroundings. Lois asked Virginia what time it was. Virginia replied that it was still early, suggesting that her mother could go back to sleep after she turned on her favorite radio station. Virginia left the room and went to the utility closet, where she took out a sharp knife and a hammer that she had bought earlier. It was clear she didn't have a solid plan, but she believed these tools would help her finish what she had started. When Virginia returned to her mother's room, Lois was smiling and listening to her favorite song, completely unaware of her daughter's presence. Virginia hesitated for a moment, then raised the hammer, brought it down forcefully onto Lois's head. Blood began to flow from the injury, but Lois calmly looked at her daughter and asked what she was doing. Without answering, Virginia grabbed the knife, started to stab her mother in the neck and chest in a frantic manner. Within a few minutes, the brutal attack was over. Virginia dropped the bloody knife on the floor, knelt down, and held her mother's still warm hand. She sat silently for about half an hour before going to the shower to wash off the blood and change into clean clothes. The next day, Virginia remained at home with her parents' bodies, trying to decide how to handle the situation. She thought about different ways to dispose of them, but soon realized it would be nearly impossible to discreetly remove and bury the bodies. The neighbors might notice something unusual. She lacked the physical strength to move both bodies and dig graves. Ultimately, Virginia came up with a bleak solution. She decided to seal her parents inside the house. However, executing this plan would take a lot of effort. She started by visiting a sporting goods store, where she purchased 2 sleeping bags to serve as makeshift coffins. Next, she went to a hardware store and bought many rolls of plastic sheeting, cement mix, expanding foam, and cinder blocks, which were delivered to her home. When the neighbors inquired, Virginia said her father was working on a minor renovation project, and they did not ask any more questions. Overwhelmed by the task, Virginia carefully placed her parents in sleeping bags, tightly wrapped them in plastic sheeting and tape to create a seal. She then moved her father's body to his office, positioning it in a corner behind his desk. Following the instructions, she mixed the cement and started to construct a makeshift sarcophagus around him, pouring cement over the body using expanding foam to fill in any gaps. Virginia chose to leave her mother's body in the room where the violent incident happened. She pushed the sleeping bag, along with the blood-stained blanket and other bedding, into the closet. Next, she coated everything with expanding foam. Then, she wrapped the closet in 20 rolls of plastic sheeting to seal it off. Finally, she built a wall using the leftover cinder blocks, closing off the corner where the closet with her mother's remains was located. On the same day, Virginia ordered 2 new credit cards from the bank in the names of her deceased parents. To relieve stress, she started making online purchases. She also sent several messages to her siblings, pretending to be her mother. In these messages, she claimed that she and her father were taking a trip to the seaside to relax and improve their health. Her older sisters, who seldom visited, did not question her and simply wished their parents a pleasant getaway. The global issues provided Virginia with an excuse for the next 6 months. She continued her daily activities as if nothing had changed. She did grocery shopping, spoke with her neighbors, collected her parents' pensions, and occasionally sent messages to relatives pretending to be her mother, hoping to keep them from worrying. She even scheduled appointments for her parents with their doctor, but cancelled them for various reasons. When people inquired about her parents and why they hadn't been around, she said they were staying with one of their many children. In the spring of 2020, the global issues leading to a worldwide lockdown. This situation worked in Virginia's favor because she no longer needed to explain why her parents weren't seen outside. With the lockdown, no visitors were coming to see them anytime soon. During this time, Virginia would sometimes call the family doctor, pretending to be her mother, to seek advice. However, when the doctor recommended an in-person appointment or offered to visit, she would make up excuses to avoid it. Virginia sent messages to her sisters using Lois's phone, inquiring about their lives and the grandchildren, but she never invited them to visit. If any of them mentioned planning a trip, she would discourage them from coming. She even called the police while pretending to be her mother, complaining about noisy neighbors or disturbances. Over time, Virginia's behavior became more unusual. She began to impose herself on people she barely knew, offering friendship and creating bizarre stories about her life. Claiming she was about to get married and move away, she also harassed delivery drivers with numerous questions and frequently called the police for minor issues. In the small town, people saw her as the local eccentric, odd but harmless. For over 4 years, Virginia successfully hid the fact that her parents had died. Even her siblings never realized they were gone, believing the messages and greeting cards they received were truly from their parents when, in fact, it was Virginia sending them. The only person who suspected something was amiss was the family doctor. He grew worried when the McCullough, who had always taken their health seriously, stopped showing up for routine checkups and lab tests. Virginia picked up their prescriptions and assured the doctor that her parents were fine. Although he repeatedly scheduled appointments, Virginia canceled each time with various excuses. Several times, the doctor came to the McCullough's house to check on their health, but instead met Virginia, who said her parents were visiting relatives. In September 2023, the doctor called the police to express his concerns and requested an investigation. On September 13, 2023, the police visited the McCullough home and asked Virginia to bring her parents to the door. Virginia became visibly nervous, claimed that her parents had gone on vacation without their phones to avoid any disturbances. She assured them that her mom and dad would be back in a couple of weeks. However, the police became suspicious of their absence. On 15 September, Essex police executed a search warrant at McCullough's home, entered the house, and arrested Virginia McCullough. Virginia calmly stated that she had something to show them. She then led the officers to her father's office, pointing out a makeshift grave by the wall. Next, she took them to her mother's room and indicated a sealed closet. The bodies of the McCulloughs were found that same day. Due to advanced decomposition, it was challenging to determine the exact cause of death. However, Virginia, now facing charges, fully confessed and provided a detailed account of how she killed her parents. When asked for her motive, she cited old childhood grudges, claimed her parents were cruel, and described them as true monsters. When the tragic events at the McCullough household were revealed, the residents of the small town of Great Baddow were shocked. However, no one was more horrified than the older children of them, who had always believed their parents were alive and being cared for by their younger sister. The family's strained relationships allowed Virginia to hide her crime for many years. Investigators determined that her motives were not based on childhood trauma or mistreatment, as she had claimed, but rather driven by financial gain. For years, Virginia had been using her parents' pension while accumulating significant debts in their names. McCullough is facing double murder charges and appeared in court on September 18th, where she was taken into custody. The next day, she appeared via video link at Basildon Crown Court from Peterborough Prison, where Judge Samantha Lee scheduled a plea hearing for December 1st. An inquest into the deaths was opened by Essex coroner Michelle Brown on October 10th and was paused while the police investigation continues. During the hearing, it was revealed that Lois McCullough died from a stab wound to the chest. The cause of death for John McCullough is still under investigation. On December 1st, McCullough appeared at Chelmsford Crown Court via video link from prison, but did not enter a plea. Her defense requested more time to prepare reports from expert witnesses. Judge Christopher Morgan scheduled the next hearing for February 5, 2024, and set a deadline of February 1st for the defense to submit their report. At the hearing on July 4th, Virginia McCullough pleaded guilty to both counts of murder, and a sentencing hearing was set to begin on October 10th. The sentencing hearing occurred on October 11th, with Judge Johnson presiding. Virginia was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after a minimum of 36 years, which means she can be considered for release starting on October 3, 2059. McCullough's sentence was then sent to the Attorney General's office as part of the Sentencing Over Sentence program. However, in January 2025, the Attorney General's office reviewed the sentence and determined it did not meet the criteria for an appeal to the Court of Appeals.
Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Lecia Mitchell Jackson. In 1979, the Jackson family lived in Conroe. They chose to build their lives there and were respected by the community as a hard-working and loving couple. Over time, they had 3 children, with Lecia Mitchell Jackson being the youngest. Despite the high crime rate in the area, the Jackson family felt safe and content with their peaceful life. Lecia was intelligent and well-read, spending her time with books. She did well in school, prioritizing her studies as she wanted to go to college, obtain a solid education, and build a career. Lecia spent most of her time with her 2 older brothers, and despite the age gap, they had a close relationship and enjoyed spending time together. When her brothers turned 16 and 18, Lecia was only 12, which made her feel safe around them. On September 7, 1979, the weather was warm, perfect for a day at the lake. The brothers had not originally planned to take Lecia with them, but she asked to come along at the last minute. Their cousin, who was 20 at the time, also joined them. The parents allowed the 4 of them to go to the lake, a popular activity in the area where locals often fish or gather by the water. They prepared and headed to the lake in the afternoon, arriving around 4 p.m. They spent some time relaxing, swimming, and sunbathing, planning to leave at 7 p.m. to prepare for the next day. Since it was Lecia's first time there, she wanted to explore the area more. She decided not to swim and just wanted to walk. However, none of the brothers wanted to go with her, so they let her go by herself. Most of the way to the parking lot, where Lecia's brothers were waiting, was visible. When Lecia was out of sight, the others continued to prepare to leave, unaware that she had disappeared. These were usually peaceful areas where attacks and murders were rare, so the 12-year-old girl did not feel afraid. After about half an hour, when Lecia still had not appeared, her brothers began to worry. They rushed to find her, first using their phones to call their sister, other family members, and the police. The older brother went to a nearby gas station, which had the only phone in the area, to report Lacia's disappearance to their parents. Meanwhile, the rest of the group intensified their search. Their concern attracted the attention of other vacationers, and some local boys and girls joined in to help. They searched the area, calling for Lacia, but found nothing. Some even began diving into the shallow part of the lake, thinking she might have swum alone and drowned. On the other side of the lake, where Lacia had gone, was a steep cliff. Some people speculated that she might have tried to dive in but failed. However, Lacia was not the adventurous type and would not have made such a choice. In addition, without her brother following her, the underwater search would have been fruitless. After a while, Lacia's parents arrived at the scene with the police. Some volunteers also came to help search the lake area, and a few policemen spoke to her brother, who had lost track of her. The police's initial hypothesis was that she had accidentally drowned, and they based this on the presence of the cliff. They first focused their search on the lakeshore and the quieter areas of the lake, thinking that she might have decided to swim while walking and had come to a part of the lake where swimming was not allowed. There were dangerous undercurrents that could have caused her legs to cramp, leading to drowning. Searching the area yielded no results. The police believed that the unpredictable undercurrent could have pulled an inexperienced swimmer under. They hypothesized that Lacia might have fallen victim to such a current, which could have caused her body to sink and not resurface. Lacia's brother insisted that she had been wearing casual clothes, not a swimsuit, and that she was a good girl who would never have gone underwater dressed like that. Unfortunately, it seemed that no one listened to him, as the focus remained on the accidental drowning theory. After hours of fruitless searching, the group considered calling in divers to examine the water further. Suddenly, one of the searchers discovered small, broken glasses that clearly belonged to a child. When shown to other children, they confirmed that Lacia had been wearing the same type of glasses. The most alarming detail was the faint bloodstains on the glasses. It was suspected that these glasses had been found on a road leading away from the lake, especially since no trace of Lacia was found in the water. This led the police to shift their focus from drowning to kidnapping, increasing their attention to the land around the lake. Near where the glasses were found, the police also discovered an earring that belonged to Lacia. Her parents confirmed that it was hers. Another witness informed the police that he had seen a brown Chevrolet Monte Carlo driven by a reckless driver who was behaving erratically. The driver suddenly changed lanes and skidded on the road, appearing to be under the influence of alcohol or drugs. This behavior raised suspicion, prompting the police to investigate young people driving similar vehicles that matched the witness's description. However, there were many such cars in the area, as this model was quite common. In addition, no one could clearly remember the driver's face or license plate number, leaving the police without any solid clues. They checked the road service reports in the hope that the reckless driver had been involved in an accident, but found nothing. Lacia's brothers felt guilty for not looking after their sister, and all the family members wanted to know what had happened to Lacia. Lacia's parents hoped that they would receive a call from the kidnapper demanding a ransom. However, the phone remained silent, and no letters arrived in the first 24 hours after she went missing. Initially, Lacia's family hoped that she would return home safely, but as time went on, that chance began to diminish rapidly. The situation worsened on September 13, 6 days after Lacia's disappearance. Early that morning, a worker was preparing to go to the oil facility where he had worked for many years when his supervisor received a call. He was directed to a remote area to inspect and repair a pipeline, which happened to be near the lake where the Jackson family had vacationed a week earlier. Upon arriving and inspecting the pipeline, the worker immediately smelled a very strong and unpleasant odor. Although the smell was not unusual for him, as the facility was located in a wilderness area where animals sometimes got into the pipeline and died, He was accustomed to dealing with such situations. Cleaning up dead animals was part of his daily routine. After completing the repair, he decided to investigate the source of the stench. A few meters from the pipeline, he discovered the body of a small child. He quickly notified his superiors, who called the police. When they reported the discovery of a child's body, the police immediately thought of the missing girl, Licia, for whom they had been actively searching in the area. The state of the body made immediate identification impossible. It was so decomposed that even determining the gender was difficult. They would need to conduct an examination and check dental records to confirm that the body was indeed Licia, marking the end of the search for the girl. This also began the hunt for the person responsible for the crime. During the investigation at the site where the body was discovered, the police found Licia's clothes. They concluded that the girl's body had been brought to the location after the crime had occurred and that the attack had not taken place there. The perpetrator appeared to have been careless with the evidence, leaving it behind. It is likely that the suspect was a local resident familiar with the area. The condition of the body complicated the investigation. Experts determined that the girl had been abused and then strangled, but the exact circumstances of the crime could not be established. During an examination of her clothing, small biological traces were found on her shorts, which could potentially identify the perpetrator. Unfortunately, in 1979, forensic technology was not advanced enough to analyze these traces, but the police wisely chose to preserve them for future analysis. Licia's death caused panic and tension in the community. The city, known for its low crime rate, had not experienced a murder in many years. The brutal murder of a 12-year-old girl in broad daylight, especially in a relatively densely populated area, left the community in a state of shock. People no longer felt safe, and the police station was overwhelmed with calls from locals asking for increased security and a swift arrest of the perpetrator. Unfortunately, this was not an easy task. The police followed many leads regarding the suspect, but all of them came to a dead end. Additionally, almost everyone who was present at the lake on that tragic day was investigated. Special focus was placed on the owners of brown cars. These checks lasted for months, but yielded no results. The police also investigated known abusers who were in the area at the time, but these efforts also proved fruitless. Years passed, but Licia's family still could not learn the truth about what happened to her. As the 1990s and 2000s progressed, Licia's relatives came to terms with their situation, losing hope of discovering what had happened to Licia. They admitted that they even forgave the person responsible. However, in 2020, new forensic techniques began to emerge from advances in the United States. Beginning in 2005, investigations into long unsolved crimes were launched. Police formed teams to re-examine old evidence with fresh perspectives. This renewed effort brought hope for answers to questions that had haunted the community for decades. Police recovered Licia's clothing, which contained small traces that could potentially be linked to a suspect. A thorough analysis was conducted, but unfortunately, the technology of the time was not sufficient to extract meaningful data from those small traces. This left Licia's family feeling hopeless once again. Licia's family and friends, who have long sought answers about her fate, are facing another wave of painful disappointment. However, in 2021, a significant technological advance emerged. New methods and equipment were developed that can collect and analyze microscopic traces. A key feature of this technology is the ability to completely recreate DNA samples from even the smallest remnants found on the victim's belongings and clothing. This advance has the potential to transform the investigation, as evidence collected in the 1970s could finally become significant. A team of experts was formed to re-examine the evidence using these advanced techniques. Concerns arose again about the number of traces available. If they were too few, they would have to wait for further technological advances. Fortunately, The new method successfully extracted DNA from Lycia's clothing for the first time. However, reconstructing her genetic profile required a significant amount of time and analysis. The investigation began in April 2021 and continued until October 2022, when the police finally had a complete profile of the criminal. By that time, 43 years had passed since Lycia's tragic death. The next step was to find the killer and ensure he was punished for his crimes. The police decided to cross-reference the profile with several databases, including KOS and those used by the FBI. This approach had been tried before, but the incomplete genetic profile made it difficult to narrow down potential suspects and find a reliable match. In April 2022, the police reassessed the information. After 43 years of investigation, they identified the killer as Gerald Dwight Casey. Police tracked down his last known address, hoping to confront this dangerous criminal. Unfortunately, they discovered that Gerald had died at the age of 47, 20 years before this investigation began. The police decided to take a closer look at his background. They discovered that Gerald's activities did not end with the murder of Lycia. He committed another brutal crime in 1989, exactly 10 years later. After killing Lycia, he moved to a nearby town, about a half-hour's drive from the lake, hoping to remain under the radar until the situation calmed down. Starting on November 20th, Gerald moved to another city with his girlfriend. Gerald had a troubled past, faced serious legal problems, and struggled with drug and alcohol addiction. Those who knew him considered him dangerous and unpredictable. He was a robber and had committed a series of petty thefts. At that time, Gerald was engaged to Carla Smith, 36, who also had a history of theft, legal trouble, and substance abuse. She had developed a reputation for reckless behavior. On one occasion, she was arrested for drunk driving, causing several accidents in which no one was injured. This incident led to a police chase, but she ultimately chose to stop. The young couple was planning to move to New York to start a new life and hoped to become wealthy. However, they did not have the resources necessary for such a dramatic change. With their experience in robbery, Gerald and Carla knew how to handle their situation. In the city, there was a couple named Sonia Lynn Howell and Daryl Pennington, who were known for their business success and financial stability. They knew about Daryl and Sonia, a wealthy couple, and decided to visit their house to assess the possibility of a robbery. After observing the house for a while, they noticed that Daryl and Sonia often went away together, probably for work, which would give them more opportunities to carry out their plan. After reviewing the information, the robbers planned and chose the time to break into the house. Their goal was to sell the stolen items at a pawn shop to raise money for their trip to New York. Unfortunately, their plan began to fall apart immediately. Once inside, Gerald and Carla found Sonia at home. Realizing the danger, she tried to call the police, but Carla stopped her by pointing a gun at her head and shooting her while she was dialing. Gerald then pulled out a gun and fired 9 shots at Sonia, leaving her with no chance of survival. The loud gunshots attracted the attention of the neighbors, who quickly reported the incident to the police. In their haste, the robbers took everything of value they found in the house, including money, jewelry, a Rolex watch, guns, and other equipment, before fleeing the scene. Carla searched Sonia and took valuables from her pockets. During this time, they discovered 2 strangers inside the victim's house. When the police arrived, the couple had already escaped. Unfortunately, no one was able to identify the car or the faces of the criminals because they were wearing masks. The police began to search for them, but the experienced robbers had carefully planned their escape route and fled by car without being detected. Later, an abandoned car matching the description given by witnesses was found on the outskirts of the city. It seemed like a perfect case again, but this time, greed got the better of them. They were too impatient and rushed to New York, which led to a number of mistakes. The biggest mistake they made was to immediately go to a pawn shop and sell all the stolen goods there. The pawnbroker did not display the goods and instead contacted the police. The pawnbroker remembered the thieves, returned the stolen goods, and provided footage from his surveillance camera. The police recognized several familiar faces and later located and arrested Gerald and Carla on the highway. The couple was headed to New York, but their trip was abruptly stopped at a checkpoint. They did not resist arrest, although the police were prepared to use force if necessary. While they denied killing Sonia, the evidence at the crime scene was clear bloody fingerprints and their hair were found. Carla accepted a plea deal with the prosecution in exchange for a lighter sentence. Her lawyer considered this a favorable deal because the couple faced the possibility of the death penalty. As a result, she testified against her boyfriend Gerald, leading to his conviction for Sonia's murder and several other crimes. Gerald was sentenced to death, while Carla received a reduced sentence of 10 years in prison for her involvement in the incident. After serving 10 years, Carla was released and has not had any legal problems since. Gerald, on the other hand, remained incarcerated while awaiting execution. After several appeals, he was finally given a lethal injection on April 18, 2002, at the age of 47. Gerald's attorney made significant efforts to have his sentence commuted to life in prison to save his life, but all efforts were unsuccessful. Throughout his life, up until his execution, Gerald never admitted to killing Sonia and did not mention the murder of Lesia Mitchell Jackson. The evidence against him for Lesia's murder was clear and convincing. It is suspected that Gerald may have been involved in more murders in Texas in the 1970s and 1980s. However, thorough investigations using various databases have found no genetic matches between him and evidence from other unsolved cases. This does not mean that he limited himself to just 2 violent incidents. At a time when forensic science was just beginning to advance and the understanding of genetics was limited, it is likely that some of his other victims have not yet been discovered. There may still be unsolved cases in the archives. Lesia's family was relieved to know that her killer had been brought to justice, but this did not bring them much comfort. Lesia's mother struggled for a long time to come to terms with her daughter's murder. She made it clear that she did not blame her sons for not keeping an eye on their sister, although the brothers still carry a sense of guilt. A few years after the tragedy, the Lesia family moved away from Texas in search of a place where they would not be reminded of their past.
It was a quiet evening in Bristol, just after 8 p.m., when things took a dark turn inside a home. The shouting grew louder, followed by a sudden silence. A young child stood at the top of the stairs, watching what no child should ever see. Someone lying on the kitchen floor downstairs, bleeding. The other person was already trying to hide what had happened. This wasn't just a fight. It was the breaking point of a relationship full of jealousy, anger, and years of warning signs. No one expected that night to end in tragedy, but when the truth came out, it shocked everyone. Abigail White was born in 1998 and raised in Bristol, England. The early chapters of her life were defined not by innocence or joy, but by chaos and abuse. From a young age, Abigail found herself in a home dominated by violence. Her father was abusive, routinely harming her mother. Though her parents eventually divorced, any hope for peace was short-lived. Abigail's mother entered a new relationship, and a new man moved into the home. Instead of stability, the cycle of abuse continued, with the new man creating a similarly hostile environment. When Abigail's mother gave birth to a new child, her stepfather's cruelty escalated. He began abusing Abigail. The trauma was finally exposed. Abigail was removed from the home and placed into foster care, but the damage had already taken root. Foster care was supposed to be a turning point, a place to heal, but Abigail carried her scars with her. School became an ongoing struggle. She had trouble focusing, lashed out frequently, and reacted violently to the smallest disruptions. Her anger wasn't just surface level. It came from a deep place, a defense mechanism forged by years of trauma. She demanded control in all situations, often exploding when she didn't get her way. Eventually, her behavior led to expulsion, and she was transferred to a school designed for students with serious behavioral issues. She briefly lived with her grandmother, but even that environment proved too volatile. Her grandmother couldn't handle Abigail's unpredictable moods. The girl was just 13 when she was sent back to her biological father, an alcoholic who was in no position to provide stability or guidance. Though Abigail made efforts to attend therapy, her pain remained raw. She began drinking, and cocaine followed. She would later say the banned substance were the only escape from the constant darkness in her mind. By 15, Abigail had attempted to end her own life twice. That year, she met her first boyfriend, and it was her first taste of what she believed love could be. For 7 months, she felt some kind of happiness, but once the relationship ended, she spiraled again, and her next relationship would be even more damaging. At 16, she began seeing a 29-year-old man, an age gap that raised eyebrows, but no red flags stopped the relationship. It lasted 2 years, ending shortly after she turned 18. She officially moved into social housing. It was a modest space, but for Abigail, it was the first time she had a home that felt like hers. That's when she reconnected with Bradley Lewis. They had known each other during their school years, but now, as adults, something more grew between them. Abigail was 19. Bradley was 17. Their relationship moved quickly, and they soon welcomed their first child. Over the next 5 years, 2 more children followed. By 23, Abigail was a mother of 3, and Bradley, just 21, worked full-time as a floor installer. Abigail stayed home, raising their children and trying to build a life. But living on one income was hard. Desperate to contribute financially, she began seeking alternative ways to make money from home. That's when she discovered the world of online adult modeling. Abigail launched an OnlyFans account. Her content was bold, provocative, and quickly became a success. Within a year, she earned £50,000. While her income eventually decreased, it still provided a steady income and a taste of validation she had never known before. But money didn't solve her problems. Behind the scenes, her relationship with Bradley was deteriorating. Their home life became increasingly toxic, defined by frequent arguments and violent outbursts, followed by recurring breakups and reconciliations. Neither seemed able to walk away. Despite the mounting emotional damage, Abigail's rage extended beyond the home. In one disturbing incident, she attacked a woman in a nightclub bathroom, convinced the woman had looked at her the wrong way. The victim was severely beaten, and Abigail was sentenced to 12 months of community service. In her daily life, Abigail was controlling, demanding that everything go her way. She issued orders to Bradley, with zero tolerance for disobedience, erupting if he didn't comply. She craved constant affirmation, from compliments to gifts, and any perceived neglect triggered violent confrontations. Her need for attention was insatiable. The relationship between Abigail and Bradley had long ceased to be healthy. What remained was a cycle of fights, betrayals, and emotional warfare. Most days were marked by shouting matches and cold silences that stretched late into the night. Their children were caught in the middle, silently absorbing the surrounding chaos. From an outsider's perspective, the solution seemed obvious: separation. However, neither Abigail nor Bradley seemed ready to leave. Their relationship was characterized by infidelity. Though they were not in an open relationship, both cheated, both knew about the other's affairs, and both reacted with jealousy. Abigail, in particular, demanded immediate responses to her messages. Any delay triggering paranoia that Bradley was with another woman. Ironically, while she was also seeing other men, their boundaries became even more blurred when they engaged in group intimate encounters. Their situation was not merely dysfunctional, it was explosive. Things deteriorated further when Abigail became pregnant and discovered that Bradley had also fathered a child with another woman. That betrayal intensified an already volatile dynamic. Abigail's rage was relentless. Friends and family on both sides urged them to separate before something irreversible happened. Abigail's parents openly despised Bradley, not only for his repeated infidelities, but also for inappropriate messages he had allegedly sent to Abigail's sister. Bradley's family, meanwhile, had their own reasons to distrust Abigail, especially after she stabbed him in the leg during an argument. The wound wasn't life-threatening, but it served as a physical reminder of the turmoil they both refused to escape. Around this time, Abigail's previous assault in the nightclub caught the attention of social services. Authorities ordered a welfare check, concerned for the well-being of the children. The assessment was clear. Abigail and Bradley were living in a toxic and potentially dangerous environment. To avoid losing custody, they agreed to live apart. Bradley moved in with his mother, finding his first sense of peace in years. That brief separation gave Bradley clarity, leading him to seriously consider ending the relationship for good. But when he expressed his doubts to Abigail, her reaction was immediate and severe. She threatened self-harm, an alarming threat given her mental health history. Over time, the threats escalated. She said she would kill the women Bradley had cheated with, the mother of his other child, his own mother, and eventually Bradley himself. By early 2022, Abigail's downward spiral was visible to all. She began posting aggressive and disturbing content on TikTok, airing their dirty laundry with no restraint. She mocked Brad, shared intimate details, and even confessed to violent behavior she had inflicted on Bradley. He felt increasingly trapped. He told friends he feared for his safety, but was too afraid of what Abigail might do if he left. On March 18th, she decided to terminate the pregnancy, a decision Bradley supported afterward. One day later, on March 19th, tensions exploded again. Abigail accused Bradley of cheating, and the fight ended with her stabbing him in the arm. He needed medical treatment, but chose not to report the truth, telling hospital staff it had been an accident. At this time, Abigail messaged a friend, admitting that her relationship had become so dangerous that she believed it would end in one of two ways. Either she would be dead or she would end up in prison. She confessed that she believed herself capable of killing Bradley. Just 6 days later, on March 25th, Abigail and Bradley met in a park for what was intended as a final, honest conversation. Abigail brought a friend, likely to maintain a sense of control or for protection. During the meeting, Bradley told her he was ending the relationship, this time for good. To everyone's surprise, Abigail didn't erupt. She didn't scream or lash out. For once, she remained eerily calm, but with her calmness was never a guarantee of peace. It was often the quiet before a catastrophe. Later that same day, they made plans to meet again. A gathering at a pub was arranged, with a few close friends joining them. Abigail brought their 3 children along. Perhaps trying to project a sense of normalcy, they agreed to meet at around 5 p.m. But when that time passed, Bradley still hadn't shown up. By 5:30 p.m., Abigail began firing off angry messages, furious at his tardiness. Her fury was fueled by the alcohol she had already consumed and further amplified by banned substance. The combination only intensified her volatility. When Bradley finally arrived at 7 p.m., he was met not with a smile, but with raw, seething rage. Abigail had convinced herself he'd been with another woman. Bradley retreated to the restroom with a friend, desperate to decompress and speak freely. There, he admitted how lost he felt and how helpless the situation had become. He no longer knew how to reason with Abigail, but even in that small, private space, there was no escape. When Bradley and his friend emerged, Abigail was waiting just outside the door. She exploded, screaming and accusing them of conspiring against her. Before anyone could react, she lunged at Bradley. In front of stunned onlookers, Abigail launched a violent assault. Bradley's friend tried to pull her away to restore calm, but Abigail spat directly in his face. The situation had escalated beyond control. Fearing further violence, Bradley's friends decided to leave. Abigail and Bradley remained, attempting once again to patch things up. Bradley ordered a round of beers, hoping to de-escalate the situation, but Abigail slapped them off the table, sending glass and foam crashing to the floor. Customers looked on in disbelief. Strangers tried to intervene, hoping to prevent further escalation, but Abigail turned on them, too, throwing a drink at one man and spitting in his face. When the man tried to push her away in self-defense, Abigail fell. She immediately called the police to report an assault, omitting the key detail that she had provoked the confrontation. Her children witnessed the entire ordeal, absorbing yet another violent chapter in their already unstable home life. By 8 p.m., Abigail and Bradley and their kids left the pub. A friend they met outside offered them a ride home. On the way back, Bradley made a comment that would later send chills down the spine of everyone who heard it. "I'm already dead," he said, aware of what likely awaited him at home. And he was right. As soon as they stepped through the front door, the argument resumed, louder, angrier, and more volatile than ever. Abigail blamed Bradley for what had happened at the pub, furious that he hadn't defended her against the man she accused of attacking her. At some point during the shouting, Abigail walked into the kitchen and came back holding a knife. Bradley had seen this before. Blades weren't new to their arguments, but this time she didn't hesitate. In one swift, violent motion, Abigail drove the knife directly into his chest. In the background, their 3-year-old son had crept downstairs, drawn by the noise. He witnessed it all. Both Abigail and Bradley froze. The rage disappeared, replaced by stunned silence. Bradley, bleeding heavily, stumbled back into the kitchen and collapsed onto the floor. But instead of immediately calling for help, Abigail panicked. Rather than grabbing the phone, she grabbed cleaning supplies. She put Bradley's blood-stained shirt into the washing machine. She tried to scrub the floor clean. She didn't want anyone to see what she had done, not even herself. This was the third time Abigail had injured Bradley with a knife, but this time she knew it was different. This wound wouldn't fade into a scar. It was too deep. Moments later, hearing the commotion, a neighbor rushed over. She found Abigail distraught, barefoot, wearing a pink dress and sporting a bruise on her arm, but no trace of blood. Bradley, meanwhile, lay motionless on the kitchen floor. Leaning over him to check for a pulse, she felt the faintest trace of breath. With trembling hands, she began performing CPR while still on the phone with emergency services. The operator instructed her to apply direct pressure to the chest wound. As she did, she noticed something deeply alarming. Very little blood was escaping. This was a terrifying sign of internal bleeding, indicating Bradley's body was beginning to shut down. The neighbor attempted to place him in the recovery position, but he was too heavy for her to move alone. Around 8:22 p.m., her husband returned home and immediately sensed that something was wrong next door. When he entered the house, he found his wife desperately trying to keep Bradley alive and took over chest compressions. Time was quickly slipping away. By 8:48 p.m., police had arrived, already spiraling into hysteria. Abigail called a friend, claiming Bradley had harmed himself. She insisted he had tried to take his own life and begged for reassurance that he would survive. The story had already begun to shift. Moments later, paramedics arrived. Bradley, just 22 years old, was rushed to the hospital and taken straight into surgery. But the damage was too severe. The knife had penetrated very deep, straight into his heart. Despite hours of surgical efforts, doctors pronounced him dead. Back at the scene, Abigail White was arrested. But even during her interrogation, she stuck to a version of events that didn't add up. At first, she claimed Bradley had stabbed himself. She then changed her story, claiming he had wrestled the knife from her. Later, she insisted Bradley had grabbed her hand, which was holding the knife, and forced it into himself. The narrative kept shifting, each version seemingly tailored to avoid blame. Unbeknownst to Abigail, there was a silent witness. Her 3-year-old son had seen it all. Incredibly, despite his age, the child was able to give police a clear and damning statement. "Mommy stabbed Daddy." It was a heartbreaking confirmation of what investigators already suspected. The evidence was overwhelming, and eventually, Abigail could no longer deny what she had done. She confessed, but claimed it had been a moment of passion. She insisted she hadn't meant to kill Bradley, only to hurt him in a moment of rage. But one detail was impossible to ignore. Abigail never called an ambulance. While Bradley lay dying on the floor, she chose to mop up his blood, toss his shirt in the wash, and stage the scene. She claimed she'd tried to call for help, but couldn't get a signal. Yet, she managed to contact a friend to spin a story about end his own life. As detectives dug deeper, they uncovered chilling internet searches made by Abigail in the days leading up to the murder. She had looked up how to tie a noose and whether someone could die from a broken heart. On March 17th, just 1 week before the killing, she also searched for miscarriage-related topics and information about stabbing incidents. In October 2022, Abigail White stood trial at Bristol Crown Court. The prosecution presented a large amount of evidence. This included security camera footage from the pub concerning TikTok videos she posted, voice messages, and over 200 statements from witnesses. Her plea to downgrade the charge to manslaughter was rejected. She was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life in prison with a possibility of parole after 18 years. Psychiatrists testified that Abigail suffers from borderline personality disorder, a diagnosis rooted in the profound trauma of her early life. But mental illness alone couldn't excuse the choices she made. Today, Abigail White remains behind bars. Reports have surfaced suggesting she is in a new relationship. It's a fact that continues to anger many who knew and loved Bradley. Still reeling from the loss, his family expressed what so many felt, that no sentence could truly reflect the life that was stolen. They say they were given their own life sentence, waking up each day to a reality without their son, brother, and father of 3. Bradley's memory, however, lives on. Hundreds attended his funeral, and public memorials now stand in his honor. His kindness, his love for his children, and his enduring popularity are remembered by all who knew him. To them, he is not gone. He is still their son, still a father, still loved, and always will be. Samantha Vernagallo and Drew Garnier first crossed paths as young adults on Long Island, New York, where they both grew up. While the specifics of their first meeting remain private, it's clear that their connection blossomed during their early 20s. Samantha, who lives in Center Reach, is a former student of Center Reach High School. She is well liked for her warm, caring personality and her dream of raising a happy family. Drew, from nearby Lake Grove, shared her aspirations for a traditional family life. Over time, their bond deepened as they discovered they both envisioned the same future: marriage, children, and building a meaningful life together. Samantha appreciates Drew's stability and commitment to creating a safe living environment. Those who know them see them as a loving couple, working toward a common goal of a happy future. Thanks to the support from their family, both Samantha and Drew grew up mature and did not face any serious issues. Neither had a troubling past. No criminal records, substance abuse, or significant mental health concerns. Drew held steady employment and showed dedication to supporting his growing family, while Samantha was known for her beauty, compassion, and devotion to her loved ones. After several years together, they married and had 2 daughters, Adelina, followed by Izzy. 3 years later, Samantha embraced motherhood wholeheartedly, always putting her daughters first and ensuring they felt safe and loved. As the family grew, they began to feel the financial pressures of living on Long Island, dreaming of a quieter, more affordable life where their daughters could thrive. Samantha and Drew decided to leave Long Island and relocate to Masonville, a small town in Delaware County, New York, situated in the scenic Catskills region, about 150 miles northwest of New York City. Masonville offered the simpler lifestyle they desired: lower living costs, a close-knit community, and a peaceful environment where children could safely play and grow. The family settled into a mobile home on Hook Road, a quiet area where neighbors knew one another and a sense of community prevailed. For Samantha and Drew, the move symbolized a fresh start. Samantha envisioned an idyllic childhood for her daughters, filled with natural beauty, fresh air, and the security of a supportive community. She remained fully committed to her family, caring deeply for her 9-year-old daughter Adelina and 6-year-old Izzy. Drew quickly adapted to the new lifestyle as well, finding work and showing dedication to his family. From the outside, Drew and Samantha Garnier appeared to have a strong marriage and a happy family life. Their life in Masonville seemed stable and focused on building a better future for their 2 daughters. Their joy grew even more when Samantha found out she was pregnant with their 3rd child. By September 2024, she was 5 months along and had learned they were expecting another daughter. For Samantha, this news brought immense happiness. She cherished being a mother and was excited about welcoming another little girl. However, those close to the family noticed that Drew's reaction to the news was quite different. While Samantha celebrated the idea of another daughter, Drew had been hoping for a son. Family members later revealed that Drew's desire for a boy had intensified with each pregnancy. Hearing they would have a 3rd daughter deeply disappointed him and seemed to affect him in ways that no one could have foreseen. Despite this hidden tension, there were no visible signs that Drew was capable of violence. He had no criminal record, history of domestic abuse, or encounters with law enforcement. To their neighbors, their family was an ordinary family, adapting to life in a small town. Samantha, although noticing subtle changes in Drew's behavior, remained focused on her family and the upcoming birth of their 3rd daughter in February 2025. She also looked forward to celebrating her 30th birthday, just 2 weeks away. Life in their family household carried on as usual during late summer and early fall of 2024. Adelina and Izzy, the daughters, went to school each day. Samantha managed the house while preparing for the new baby, and Drew went to work. Anyone observing the family would have seen a picture of normalcy, but underneath, Drew's disappointment about the baby's gender was quietly festering. With no outward signs of trouble, no calls to the police or family interventions, no one could have predicted the tragedy that was about to unfold. Those who later tried to understand Drew's actions were baffled. On the surface, he seemed to have everything: a loving wife, 2 healthy daughters, steady employment, and another child on the way. Samantha had built a life filled with love and stability for their family, but for reasons no one could fathom, the good things in Drew's life became a source of anger. On the night of Wednesday, September 4th, 2024, just days after Labor Day, their household appeared to be winding down from a normal day. Adelina and Izzy were likely getting ready for bed, and Samantha, 5 months pregnant, was caring for her daughters and preparing for the evening. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, but beneath the surface, Drew's frustrations had reached their breaking point. At around 11:29 p.m., the quiet town of Masonville was jolted by an emergency that shocked the entire community. Drew called 911 to report what he described as a domestic dispute at their family home. To the dispatcher, Drew sounded like a man trying to help his wife. He claimed Samantha had been injured and that he was applying pressure to her wounds to stop the bleeding. However, when police arrived at the scene, they discovered a horrifying scene that was completely opposite to what Drew described, permanently shattering the image of a peaceful family. New York State Police troopers Corey King and Ronald King were dispatched to respond to an emergency call. When the troopers arrived at the mobile home with its covered porch, they were prepared to assist what they believed was an injured woman. Instead, they were confronted with an unthinkable scene. As they approached, Drew briefly stuck his head out the front door before quickly retreating inside. His suspicious behavior immediately alerted the troopers that something was wrong. Shortly after, a single gunshot echoed from inside the house, sending shockwaves through the officers. They quickly retreated to the end of the driveway and called for backup from a Delaware County Sheriff's deputy, using the deputy's patrol car as cover. The officers cautiously approached the house again. Suddenly, Adelina, a 9-year-old girl, emerged from the home, running toward the police with her clothes soaked in blood. The officers' hearts sank as they realized this child had witnessed unimaginable violence. Through tears, Adelina told the officers that her mother had been stabbed and that her father, Drew, was still inside the house with a gun. As they worked to protect Adelina, her 6-year-old sibling, Izzy, also ran out, similarly covered in blood. Both sisters were deeply affected by the horrific events that had just occurred. Despite being injured and in shock, they still tried to talk to the police. The officers provided first aid to the children and called for additional medical assistance. It was clear that both girls had endured a horrific ordeal. Once they were safely transported to receive medical care, the focus turned back to Drew inside the house. The officers called out for him to surrender, and to their surprise, he walked out of the home with his hands raised. Drew was immediately arrested without resistance. The officers noted he was covered in blood and had cuts on his hands. During his arrest, police found a butter knife in his pocket, a chilling piece of evidence that would later shed light on the brutal events of that night. Inside the house, the officers found Samantha lying on her side, critically injured with multiple stab wounds. Despite their efforts to provide life-saving aid, it was clear her injuries were severe. Emergency medical personnel arrived, and Samantha was airlifted to Wilson Medical Center in Johnson City. Both daughters, Izzy and Adelina, were flown to Upstate Medical Center in Syracuse as well, due to the severity of their injuries. Investigators later determined that all 3 victims had been subjected to a prolonged and brutal attack. Tragically, Samantha succumbed to her injuries and was pronounced dead at the hospital. She was only 29 years old and just 2 weeks away from her 30th birthday. Her unborn daughter, whom she had been 5 months pregnant with, also did not survive. Adelina and Izzy remained hospitalized in serious condition but were expected to recover physically. However, the emotional trauma they endured would require extensive therapy and support for years. Drew was transported to A.O. Fox Hospital for treatment of superficial self-inflicted wounds. After receiving care, he was processed at the New York State Police Barracks in Sydney. He was charged and faced full legal accountability for the horrific attack. The investigation that followed was detailed and exhaustive, led by New York State Police, with support from the Delaware County Sheriff's Office and local law enforcement agencies. Major Lucas Schuder, commander of Troop C, held a press conference on September 6, 2024, to provide new information regarding the arrest and charges in the case. What made this case particularly unsettling for investigators was that it marked the first time the state police had been called to Samantha and Drew's residence for a domestic issue. There were no prior reports, no history of domestic violence, and no indication that Drew was capable of such violence toward his own family. As the investigation progressed, police discovered additional alarming evidence. A search of the property revealed that Drew owned multiple firearms and 2 high-capacity ammunition-feeding devices. These findings led to weapons-related charges being added to the list of crimes he faced. On September 5, 2024, Drew Garnier was officially charged with second-degree murder and 2 counts of attempted second-degree murder. He was arraigned at Delhi Town Court and sent to the Delaware County Jail without bail. Recognizing the gravity of the case, Delaware County District Attorney Shah Smith quickly convened an emergency grand jury session. On September 11, 2024, the grand jury issued an 8-count indictment against Drew. In addition to the original charges, the indictment included weapons violations, second-degree murder, 2 counts of attempted murder, criminal use of a firearm, and multiple counts of illegal weapon possession. Drew pleaded not guilty to all charges at his arraignment before Delaware County Court. Judge John L. Hubbard, who ordered him to remain in the custody of the Delaware County Sheriff's Office without bail. If convicted on all charges, Drew faced a potential sentence of 25 years to life in prison. However, as the case advanced, it became evident that going to trial would force his daughters, Adelina and Izzy, to relive the trauma of that horrific night by testifying. To prevent further emotional harm to the girls, prosecutors opted for a negotiated plea deal. On March 25, 2025, Drew pleaded guilty to reduced charges of first-degree manslaughter and 2 counts of first-degree assault. in exchange for a total sentence of 30 years in state prison, followed by 15 years of post-release supervision. District Attorney Smith explained that, although the sentence was lower than the maximum possible sentence, the agreement was in the best interests of Izzy and Adelina. The sentencing hearing took place on May 13, 2025, in Delaware County Court. The courtroom was filled with family members, community members, and court officials. During the hearing, only one victim impact statement was read, that of Samantha's father, Gregory Vernagallo. He provided critical insight into what had driven the crime. Gregory informed the court that Drew had wanted a boy and became furious when he found out Samantha was pregnant with their third daughter. He explained that this shocking revelation, that gender disappointment had motivated such horrific violence, had added a deeply disturbing dimension to an already tragic case. He also shared that he had adopted his two granddaughters and devoted his life to raising them, stating that he was their father now and would protect them. He added that he hadn't left their sides since the attack. When given the chance to speak, Drew addressed the court with apparent remorse and expressed his regret to his in-laws, especially his children. He also expressed hope that someday he could make amends with his kids. He said he would not force anything on them and respected their decisions, but added that if they ever wanted to see him, he hoped he would be allowed to be there for them. Public defender Joseph Hermeti emphasized the lack of logic behind the crime, stating that his client, Drew, had no explanation for what had happened. Joseph described the situation as extremely tragic and mentioned that he didn't believe anyone would disagree with that assessment. Judge John L. Hubbard considered Drew's clean record before sentencing him. The judge said Drew had taken the life of his wife and harmed his children, who were entitled to his protection, and sentenced him to 30 years in prison. During the hearing, Drew asked for permission to continue contact with his daughters, Izzy and Adelina, while incarcerated. Delaware County District Attorney Shah Smith strongly opposed the request, urging the court to impose the longest possible no-contact orders. Judge John agreed and issued stay-away orders for both Izzy and Adelina until 2056, which is 8 years beyond Drew's maximum potential release date. The judge added that if the daughters ever wished to contact their father, they could petition the court to revise the protective orders. Drew refused to sign the court orders, but they were served to him in court regardless. His refusal was seen as further resistance to accepting responsibility for his actions against his children. This heartbreaking case has had devastating consequences for all involved. Samantha and Drew's two daughters, Adelina and Izzy, are now orphans because of their father's actions. The girls are now legally adopted by their grandfather Gregory and have moved to a new home to settle down and receive better care. A GoFundMe campaign organized by Aaron Leahy from Center raised over $16,000 to support Izzy and Adelina. The campaign described Samantha, the girl's mother, as compassionate and loving. It revealed that Samantha was pregnant with a baby girl due in February 2025 and was just weeks away from celebrating her 30th birthday when her life was tragically cut short. The crime shocked the residents of Masonville, a small, peaceful community where such acts of violence are extremely rare. District Attorney Sean Smith commended law enforcement for their diligent investigation and dedication. He mentioned that what made the case especially chilling was the lack of any warning signs that could have foreshadowed such violence. Drew Garnier had no prior criminal record, mental health issues, or prior interactions with law enforcement. The revelation that gender disappointment over an unborn child could escalate to the murder of a pregnant wife and an attack on his daughters serves as a sobering reminder of how domestic violence can erupt without any prior indications. A mother of two disappeared mysteriously, she sending alarming messages to her family before she vanished. Police began investigating immediately, trying to understand conflicting information. However, the investigation took an unexpected turn, revealing a shocking story that would captivate the nation. Katie Kenyon was born in Burnley, a small town in Britain. She had two very close sisters. Even as a child, Katie was known for her kindness and generosity, always willing to help others. Later, she married and had two children, a son and a daughter. Sadly, her husband left, and although he occasionally visited the children, Katie raised them on her own. It was difficult, as her job as a social care worker didn't pay much, but Katie always made sure her children had everything they needed. On April 22, 2022, 33-year-old Katie followed her normal morning routine, preparing her children for school and sending them off. Later that day, around noon, Katie's mother received a strange text message from her. Katie stated she needed to get away for a while to clear her head. Her mother immediately tried calling her, but the call went directly to voicemail. The idea that she would abandon everything, especially her children, seemed completely out of character. Katie's mother contacted Katie's sister, Sarah Kenyon Holden. They rushed over to her house and noticed that her car was gone. Using a spare key, they let themselves inside and found all of Katie's belongings right where she'd left them, except for her phone and handbag. It just didn't add up. The idea that Katie had taken off somewhere, leaving behind almost everything she owned, felt completely wrong. Something was off. Soon after, Katie's children arrived home from school and shared something concerning. They had both received odd text messages, supposedly from their mother. In the texts, Katie stated she needed help to become a better mother and instructed them to contact their father to care for them during her absence. Upon reading these messages, Sarah immediately suspected they weren't written by her. Firstly, the tone was unlike Katie's usual way of speaking. More significantly, the word "while" was misspelled in both texts, which was highly unusual for Katie, as she never made such errors. Katie had mentioned Andrew Burfield, Katie's ex-boyfriend of several years, in messages to her children, saying he would care for them if their father couldn't. Sarah contacted Andrew. He told her he hadn't seen Katie since the previous day because he'd been at work. He stated that Katie texted him around 2 p.m. that day, informing him that she was leaving her car, keys, and bank card in his mailbox. Andrew claimed this was to repay the £6,000 she owed him for past anxiety treatment. However, Sarah completely disbelieved Andrew's account. Katie's son then mentioned that Andrew had contacted him on social media. Andrew's message stated that Katie had checked into a clinic and asked him to care for her dog until she returned. This struck Katie's mother and Sarah as odd. While they knew Katie and Andrew had a long, turbulent relationship, they believed it was over. Therefore, it seemed strange that Katie would inform Andrew of her plans while neglecting to tell her own mother or children. So, Sarah and her boyfriend decided to drive over to Andrew's place and investigate. The moment they pulled up, she spotted Katie's car parked outside. Inside, she could see Katie's purse and other personal belongings, which only heightened her suspicion. She knocked on Andrew's door, hoping to talk to him face to face, but he refused to open it and told them to leave. The whole thing felt incredibly off. Sarah didn't understand why Andrew seemed so uncooperative. Her boyfriend ended up threatening to kick the door down if he didn't let them in, but Andrew just called the police instead. A few minutes later, officers arrived and spoke with Katie's sister first. She laid everything out, how the family was worried sick, and how they didn't believe for a second that Katie would just vanish without saying a word to anyone. She also pointed out her sister's car still parked there with her stuff inside. After that, the police knocked on Andrew's door. He gave them the same story he told over the phone, that he'd been at work when Katie texted him about leaving her car, keys, and bank card, and said she was going to check herself into a clinic. He even let them search his house and his van, and they didn't find anything suspicious. So, the police left, but they did open a missing persons case. Just to cover all bases, they called around to a bunch of clinics, hoping maybe Katie really had checked herself in somewhere, but not a single one had seen her. The next morning, police began piecing together a timeline of Katie's disappearance. And naturally, all eyes were on Andrew's house, since that's where her car had been found. Detectives learned there was a surveillance camera nearby, so They pulled the footage from the previous couple of days. On April 21st, the day before Katie went missing, she was seen pulling up to Andrew's house. The footage showed her getting into his van, kissing him and smiling. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. But the next morning, at 9:20 a.m., things took a very different turn. That was the day Andrew told police he'd been at work when Katie supposedly dropped off her car, but the footage showed otherwise. It clearly showed Katie arriving at his house, getting out of her car and climbing into the passenger seat of Andrew's van. And right there behind the wheel was Andrew himself. Police immediately checked traffic cameras along the direction the van had gone. This time, the van stopped at a McDonald's, then headed out toward the highway. The final footage showed Andrew turning onto a rural back road leading into a wooded area. After that, the van disappeared from view for nearly an hour, but then it popped up again. This time, though, there was only one person in the vehicle. So, now, a much darker picture was starting to form. Based on the footage, it looked like Andrew had driven Katie out to a wooded area and then left without her. The police pulled location data from Katie's phone on the day she went missing. The record showed that her phone disconnected from the tower near her house early that morning, then reconnected near Andrew's home. From there, the phone's path followed the exact route the van had taken. According to the location data, Katie's phone was still in the van as it headed back towards Andrew's place. The problem was Katie was no longer in the van. And then came the final piece. Investigators checked the time those strange messages were sent to Katie's mom and kids. And by that point, Andrew had already returned home alone. But location data clearly showed that those texts were sent from his house. Given that all the evidence directly contradicted Andrew's version of events, police decided to head back to his house. The moment they stepped inside, something felt off. The place was boiling hot. Turns out Andrew had fired up the wood, burning stove, despite the weather being pretty mild outside. Right away, detectives suspected he might have been trying to destroy some evidence. But by the time they got there, all that was left in the stove was ash. Even so, they arrested Andrew and brought him in for questioning. Surprisingly, he didn't seem nervous at all. In fact, he looked completely relaxed and stuck to his original story, claiming Katie had probably checked herself into a clinic to deal with her anxiety. When detectives started pressing for more answers, he shut down completely and said he wouldn't talk without a lawyer. So, once again, they were left with nothing. After the interrogation, police decided to launch a large-scale search operation in the forest, where Katie's phone had last pinged right before Andrew was seen driving back alone. Covering that area, however, wasn't an easy task. They were looking at roughly 25 miles of rugged terrain. Still, they pulled in dozens of officers, requested backup from other agencies, and headed out into the woods. Soon they had helicopters with thermal imaging, drones, specialized equipment, and even a team of divers. Volunteers joined in too. The search quickly became one of the biggest operations their town had ever seen. But even with all that manpower, it still wasn't enough to cover such a huge area. Then, out of nowhere, police got a tip. Someone had seen Andrew's van parked in a specific part of the forest. That changed everything. Now that they had a likely spot, they were able to narrow the search down to a 5-mile radius. As the search teams combed through the forest, detectives brought Andrew in for another round of questioning. This time, they laid out the surveillance footage and other evidence they had gathered. Faced with the facts, Andrew changed his story. He admitted that he and Katie had driven out to the woods, but what he said next left investigators baffled. According to Andrew, the two of them went there to have a picnic. He claimed Katie had a habit of writing down her thoughts in a journal and then burning the pages as a way to let go of things that were bothering her. He insisted that morning had been no different. They had a picnic, lit a small fire. She burned a few pages, and then he drove home. He said he didn't know what happened to Katie after that. Of course, detectives didn't buy Andrew's story, but the problem was they still didn't have any solid leads. The search teams had come up empty, and with no trace of Katie in the woods, investigators shifted their focus to her relationship with Andrew. According to Katie's family, she had met him 3 years earlier. He had 2 kids from a previous marriage, worked in construction, and at first he seemed like a reliable, stable guy. But it didn't take long for her loved ones to notice cracks in the relationship. Andrew had a habit of trying to control Katie, telling her how to act, how to talk, even how to think. He also constantly brought up her anxiety, using it as a way to dismiss anything she said or did that he didn't like. And over time, that pressure only made her anxiety worse. Eventually, Andrew offered to pay for her treatment, and Katie agreed. But as time went on, things just kept getting worse. The fights became more frequent, more intense. Eventually, the relationship fell apart. For Katie, breaking up felt like a weight off her shoulders, but for Andrew, it was something he just couldn't accept. Not long after they split, Katie discovered someone had slashed the tires on her car. She was certain it was Andrew, but she never reported it to the police. A few months before, Katie went missing. She got a letter from the court saying she owed Andrew £4,000, the amount he'd spent on her treatment. Katie was already struggling to cover basic expenses for her and her kids. She had no idea how she'd come up with that kind of money. Over time, late fees piled on, and the debt grew to £6,000. The whole situation sent her anxiety through the roof. She was terrified she'd lose her home, the only stable place her kids had. But more than anything, she was afraid of Andrew. In one message to her mom, Katie said she was scared of him and genuinely believed he might hurt her. Still, just a month before she disappeared, Andrew reached out to her. He told her he regretted ever taking her to court. He promised to drop the case and even said he'd pay all the extra fees that had built up since the ruling. Andrew apologized for his anger, told her he wanted to change, and eventually Katie forgave him. Despite everything, they got back together. Still, detectives found something even more disturbing. Just one day after Andrew promised to fix everything with the court, he actually called the debt collectors and told them to go harder on Katie. He wanted them to push her even more. Investigators believe this was all part of his plan to increase the pressure on her, making her even more dependent on him. Katie, of course, had no idea this was happening because Andrew kept telling her he was working on canceling the whole thing. This gave detectives an even darker picture of the situation. All the evidence pointed to one conclusion: Andrew was a skilled manipulator and a compulsive liar who would do anything to get his way. Soon, detectives received further confirmation of this theory. People who knew him corroborated this, telling investigators that Andrew had a knack for getting inside people's heads and controlling them, something he had been doing for years, even with those closest to him. Despite all this, police still had no clue where Katie was. The search dragged on, day after day, without a trace. But then, finally, investigators caught a break. A local man came forward with a strange story. He said that the morning after Katie went missing, Andrew randomly showed up at his house. They were strangers, but Andrew approached him and asked a bizarre question. "Do you know when your bins were last emptied?" This immediately raised red flags. Officers rushed to the man's property and discovered that the trash bins hadn't been collected in several days. They started digging through the garbage, and inside one of the bags, they found something chilling: sandals stained with blood. A DNA test confirmed the blood was Katie's. At that point, detectives were certain of one thing: Katie was dead, and Andrew was officially charged with her murder. But a huge problem remained. They had no idea where her body was. Shortly after being formally charged, Andrew told detectives he wanted to talk. He changed his story yet again. This time, Andrew claimed he and Katie had gone to the woods that morning for a picnic. While sitting by a fire, Katie supposedly spotted a hatchet he'd used to chop wood and jokingly dared him to throw it at a soda can she was holding a few feet away. Andrew said he accepted the dare, but as he threw the hatchet, Katie suddenly leaned forward, and it struck her in the back of the head. Of course, detectives didn't believe a word of it, but this time, Andrew at least admitted the location of her body. He claimed that when Katie collapsed and died, he panicked. There was no cell service in that part of the forest, and he said he didn't have the strength to carry her back to the van. So, he decided to bury her there to prevent animals from getting to her body. He said he dug a shallow grave, placed Katie's body inside, and covered it with leaves and branches, marking the spot by tying a plastic bag to a stick, planning to return later. He also admitted to burning Katie's phone and some of her other belongings in his fireplace, then scooping up the charred remains and dumping them in a trash bin somewhere around town. After speaking with Andrew, police returned to his house, hoping to uncover new evidence. This time, forensic experts managed to find traces of Katie's blood inside his washing machine. Meanwhile, the search for Katie's body continued. Investigators focused on locating the stick with the plastic bag Andrew claimed he'd used to mark the burial site. But even with that clue, search teams couldn't find the exact spot. While the search was underway, detectives uncovered something else. After investigating Andrew's online activity, they found that he'd been communicating with numerous women on various dating sites, flirting with practically anyone who responded. He'd even been seeing at least one woman in person. According to their conversations, Andrew had told her he owned multiple properties across the country. They were even discussing moving to Scotland together and buying a house. But that wasn't the most significant discovery. As they continued examining his phone, investigators discovered something that changed everything. Based on Jeep's data, the day before Katie vanished, Andrew had stopped by his parents' house, then turned off his phone for about an hour and a half. During that time, his van was captured on several surveillance cameras heading toward the woods. After speaking to Andrew's parents, police learned that the morning before Katie went missing, he'd borrowed a shovel. That's when it clicked. Andrew had likely gone to the woods that day to dig her grave in advance. The next day, after killing Katie and using her phone to message her kids and family, Andrew also texted his other girlfriend using his own phone, telling her that something had come up with his kids and that he'd have to cancel their date. But there was more. In the Notes app on his phone, investigators found something even more disturbing: drafts of the exact same messages he'd sent to Katie's children and mother. Digital forensics showed that he'd been editing those drafts over several weeks, tweaking them repeatedly to match Katie's writing style so no one would suspect anything. Most tellingly, the word "while" was misspelled in the exact same way it appeared in the final messages. It's also important to note that the note had been created over a month before the murder, proving one thing beyond any doubt: Andrew didn't just snap. He'd been planning this for weeks, perhaps even longer, carefully laying the groundwork for something he knew he was going to do. When police confronted Andrew with the evidence that he'd been in the woods the day before the murder, he claimed he had only gone there to walk his dog, not to dig a grave. Soon after, search teams finally found the stick and the plastic bag Andrew had mentioned, but there was no grave anywhere nearby. They scoured the area inch by inch, but came up empty-handed. On April 29th, the detectives brought Andrew out to the woods and asked him to show them exactly where he had buried Katie. Once they arrived, Andrew pointed to a specific patch of ground. The ground looked completely undisturbed, flat, smooth, and totally natural. There were no signs of digging, no shifted soil, nothing out of place. It had been concealed so well that officers later admitted they would never have found it without Andrew's help. As soon as the forensic team began digging, they found Katie. But what they uncovered next was unexpected. Andrew had somehow managed to bury her beneath a web of tree roots growing deep underground. Later, a geology expert explained the complexity of the grave. According to him, it would have taken hours to dig something like that, meaning Andrew had clearly come back more than once. The expert also pointed out that Andrew had separated the soil by layers, then buried them back in the correct order, which explained why the grave looked so untouched. That level of planning was chilling. Katie's body was handed over to forensic examiners. Immediately, Andrew's story about the Coke can and the axe throw fell apart. Katie had died from blows to the head with a hatchet, not just 1 or 2, but 12 times. By that point, there was no doubt in the detectives' minds. This wasn't an accident. This was cold, calculated, and premeditated murder. With all of that evidence, the prosecution began preparing for trial. The case against Andrew was overwhelming, more than enough to secure a conviction. But one thing remained unclear: the motive. Investigators believed Andrew was fueled by bitterness and resentment. Katie had broken up with him months earlier, and it seemed his ego couldn't handle the rejection. That bruised pride, they believed, turned into hatred and ultimately led him to kill her. The trial began in November 2022, and at first, Andrew pleaded not guilty. But just 3 days in, he suddenly changed course. Out of nowhere, he reversed his plea and admitted to the murder. Unfortunately for Katie's family, he didn't offer any new details. He simply accepted responsibility, but it was still enough. In the end, the court sentenced Andrew Burfield to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 32 years, calling him a deeply dangerous individual. The case was officially closed.